Chapter 432. After not seeing him for a year, Black Bear still remembered Xiaoxian. Plus, Mao Da had already sent someone into the city ahead of them to report the situation to Black Bear. Long time no see. Xiaoxian bro. Black Bear strode over and patted Xiaoxian's shoulder with his fan-like palm. This was their tribe's etiquette, a way to express enthusiasm and welcome. If it was a normal person, their bones would have been crushed under such strength. Even if they could withstand it, they would be trembling. Xiaoxian's expression did not change as he returned the greeting. Black Bear's face froze after being slapped by Xiaoxian, but he recovered quickly. However, he did not show any more warmth. He brought Xiaoxian and Guangyi into the house and got someone to prepare rooms for them. Their group had many interactions with people, so they had their own rooms. Mao Da told Black Bear about Xiaoxian's purpose in coming to the royal city. "You're looking for Jiju?" Black Bear thought for a while and said, "Jiju of the Golden Valley hasn't appeared in King City for a long time. However, according to what I know, Jiju of the Golden Valley seems to be planting something good again and has spent a lot of effort. Since last year, he has been staying in his own farm outside the city. Not many people have seen him. Xiaoxian, it might be difficult for you to find Jiju." "I have to try," Xiaoxian said. These days on the road, he had learned a lot about Jiju from Mao Da and Mao Da. He only knew that Jiju was related to the royal city and had a high status. Now, it seemed like he had underestimated the old man. However, when he thought about the 1,000 grain gold, he would not change his plan to find Jiju. Seeing that Xiaoxian had made up his mind, Black Bear stopped trying to persuade him. Like the Mao Da brothers, he thought that if Xiaoxian could really connect with Jiju of the Golden Valley, they could also benefit from it. Jiju of the Golden Valley was not easy to get. After thinking for a while, Black Bear said, "How about this? I have nothing to do tomorrow. I'll take you to Old G's manor outside the city to try your luck and see if you can meet him. Thank you in advance." You're too polite. If I can really see Jiju, I'll have to thank you." Black Bear ordered people to prepare food and called someone to inquire about Jiju's recent movements. The next day, Black Bear brought Xiaoxian and Guangyi out of the city. A mammoth that was 6 to 7 meters tall was walking slowly in the city on its pillar-like legs. This mammoth was being led by other caravans, and it was carrying goods on its back. The mammoth's legs made loud noises as it stepped on the ground, causing the dust on the ground to rise. When it passed by Xiaoxian and Guangyi, it kicked up a cloud of dust. Giant beasts like this were not rare in the city. The people of the royal city did not think it was rare and did not pay it much attention. Although the royal city allowed giant beasts to enter, it did not mean they were allowed to roam freely. Once they entered the city, they were all under the control of their own caravans and nested in their own camps. Different caravans came from different tribes. Here, other than the caravans of various sizes, there were also people in more exquisite clothing sitting on beast carriages. This was a privilege only the nobles had. Others were not allowed to ride beast carriages in the city. Even the giant beasts used by the caravans to transport goods could not sit on them. This was the rule of the royal city. Because it was Xiaoxian's first time in the royal city, it was already late when they entered the city yesterday. Mao Da did not speak much to Xiaoxian either. Now, Black Bear gave Xiaoxian and Guangyi a brief summary of the royal city situation. Xiaoxian listened to Black Bear's tone. Although there were many rules here, a leader of a caravan like Black Bear was not afraid of the nobles. He did not think he was lower than them. When he talked about the nobles in the city, Black Bear's tone was filled with obvious disdain. The royal city was very lively. The sounds of people and the roars of beasts mixed together in the wide streets. There was the sound of copper coins clinking against each other. In the royal city, the currency was copper coins. They were shaped like narrow golden leaves, half the size of a pinky finger. They looked very similar to the leaves of the 1,000 grain gold and were also known as golden leaves. Without looking around the city, Black Bear led Xiaoxian and Guangyi out of the city. They went through a 10-meter wide dirt path to the left of the city gate. Jiju's farm is in that direction. I've been there with the previous leader before. Unfortunately, I didn't get to meet Jiju. As they walked, Black Bear told Xiaoxian about his past. At that time, the name of the golden grains was already known by many tribes. Even the tribes further away had heard of Jeju. Every year, many tribes would come to the royal city out of admiration. Because the golden grains produced by Jeju could no longer be found in the royal city, many people went to Jeju's farm to stop him, who knew that they would all be stopped outside. They couldn't even enter. Black Bear said so much so that Xiao Xian was mentally prepared. If he did not meet the Jeju people, he did not need to be discouraged. Everyone was like that. According to Black Bear, the name of Jeju was very useful. Even if it was just a weed from Jeju's farm, people would be willing to pay a high price for it. Far away from the royal city, there were also people who played with piracy. They claimed that they were produced from the golden grains outside the royal city. They sold it at a high price, and many people went to trade. But in reality, the things from Jeju's farm were always in short supply. Even if you traveled thousands of miles to the royal city, you might not be able to buy it. Even if you went to the golden grains farm to beg, you might not be able to get it. Along the way, Black Bear also told Xiao Xian about the places they passed, which land belonged to which family, and how many slaves there were. Generally speaking, the bigger the land, the more slaves there were, and the higher the status of the slave owner in the royal city. Therefore, there was no need to look at the people. Just by looking at the land, one could get a general impression. There were some tall fences around the land, blocking people who wanted to enter. As for the inside of the fences, through the gaps of the fences, one could vaguely see large and small wooden houses scattered around the land. Those were the slaves who took care of the land. These are all owned by some idle nobles and are passed down from generation to generation. If they are capable, they will be able to obtain more land. If they are not capable and commit crimes, then their land will be taken back. Oh, that piece of land over there. When I came over 2 years ago, I heard that the slave owner of that piece of land had committed a crime and was taken back. Now, the owner of that piece of land has changed. As they were talking, the three of them suddenly heard the sound of wheels approaching from afar. "Get out of the way! Get out of the way! Don't block the way!" Someone shouted. Xiao Xian and the other two originally wanted to move out of the way, but when they heard this, they stopped and turned to look. It was a carriage pulled by 2 horses. The 2 horses pulling the carriage were 3 meters tall, with brown fur and large horns on their heads. The horses' hooves were like basins. When they stepped on the ground, they could hear the sound of the stones on the ground being crushed. The surroundings of the carriage were covered with fine silk cloth, and there were even patterns drawn on the cloth. Xiao Xian recognized the pattern. It was the tribal pattern of the royal Ji family, which was also the current Ji clan pattern. When the people of the royal city saw such a pattern, most of them would voluntarily move out of the way, but there were some who would not. Black Bear did not want to cause trouble and was willing to move out of the way. However, when he was yelled at to get out of the way, he was not happy. Although the road was not smooth and the carriage was not going fast, the horses' hooves showed no signs of slowing down. They stomped on the ground and charged forward. Beside the carriage were 8 bodyguards. Those bodyguards recognized Black Bear, and when they saw this situation, they couldn't help but curse in their hearts. This is bad. Seeing that the carriage was getting closer and closer, and Xiao Xian and the other 2 did not move out of the way, the driver's eyes flashed with a haze. He waved his long whip, urging the horse pulling the carriage to directly crash into them. When the guards saw this, they cursed the coachman 1,000 times in their hearts. However, it was too late to stop him. These 2 horses were not new horses that had just pulled the carriage. They had encountered such situations many times, so after being whipped, their hooves stomped even harder. The horses' heads drooped, and the sharp horns on their heads pointed forward. Black Bear snorted mockingly. Instead of retreating, he took a big step towards the carriage and pulled out the large copper knife on his back that was more than 2 palms wide and more than a meter long. The thick and broad copper blade radiated an undisguised aggressive aura, with wild wildness and biting cold murderous intent. Black Bear held the large copper knife. With a swing of his arm, the knife drew a cold light in the air, like the sharp claws of a ferocious beast. Bang! The ground in front of the Black Bear was easily torn open, leaving a half-meter wide hole. The violent air spread out in all directions along with the dust. The flying pieces of hard earth hit the two horses in front of it like raindrops and turned into smoke with a bang. Even if they were just chunks of earth, when their hardness, speed, volume, and quantity reached a certain level, their attack power could not be underestimated. The two horses pulling the carriage raised their front legs and neighed under the attack of the chunks of earth. They probably felt the irresistible killing intent from Black Bear and stopped decisively. The horse came to an abrupt stop, and the people sitting in the carriage almost fell out. The curtain of the carriage between Xiao Xian and the others moved. A delicate voice came from inside. What happened? Following this question, the curtain was pulled open and a young woman wearing a pure white fur jumped out of the carriage. Probably because of the chaos just now, her hair was a bit messy. The person who came out with a cold face glanced at Xiao Xian and the others and said sternly, "How dare you?" Black Bear blew the dust off his knife. Hearing this, he was so angry that he laughed. He never took the initiative to offend people, but the premise was that the other party did not take the initiative to provoke him. As the leader of the Black Bear caravan and the leader of the tribe, he was yelled at to get lost. If he backed down now, who would respect the Black Bear caravan in the future? Respect is mutual. If you don't respect me, why should I respect you? The 6 royal families? Not even the royal families. A slip of the tongue? A slip of the tongue is also not allowed. How dare you? I've always been very bold. Black Bear did not have the slightest intention of backing down. He still stood there steadily. The guards around the young woman wanted to say something several times, but there was no place for them to interrupt. Besides, according to their master's temperament, she would not listen even if they said something. Chapter 433. The young woman in the white coat wanted to say something, but a voice came from not far away. Wait. Another carriage came from behind. However, it was not pulled by horses but by a cow. In terms of size, it was even bigger than the horse in front. Although it was pulled by a cow, the curtains on the carriage were the same as the one in front. Whether it was the material or the workmanship, they were all very fine. The ox cart slowly came to a stop. Because the carriage in front was blocking the road, the big yellow ox that was pulling it snorted and pushed the carriage to the side with its horns. The two horses seemed to be old rivals of the cow. When they saw each other, their eyes turned red and the cow's horns collided with the horses. The cow was fighting 1 against 2, but was not at a disadvantage. This was probably the benefit of having 2 horns. At this time, 2 young people jumped down from the carriage. It was a man and a woman. They looked similar, but the man was slightly older. "Ji Yin, Ji Wan, you dare to hit my carriage?" The woman in the white coat shouted angrily when she saw them. Unfortunately, the 2 did not even look at her. Instead, they walked quickly towards Black Bear. "So it's Black Bear, Bamey. Boss Black, sorry for offending you just now. I have something important to do today, so I can't say in detail. If it's inconvenient, I'll definitely come tomorrow to apologize," the young man said. He was the one who shouted, "Wait, Ji Yin?" Black Bear looked at the man in front of him. He knew this person and knew this was the end of the matter. He could not continue fighting, so he put his sword away and carried it on his back. What this person meant by paying a visit to make amends was to send someone over with an apology gift. The woman in the white coat realized that the people in front of her were not easy to deal with. She knew she had made a mistake, so she did not say anything, implying that Ji Yin wanted to apologize. Black Bear looked at the 3 from the Ji family and couldn't be bothered to argue. Perhaps Ji Ju would say a few more words to him for the sake of the 3 of them? That old man Ji Ju had a bad temper. Even if he didn't know what kind of attitude he would have towards his 3 grandchildren. Also, he did not know if Ji Yan's important matter had anything to do with Ji Ju. Thinking of this, Black Bear did not plan to stop them. His fierce face broke into a smile. "You're going to Golden Grain, Master Ji Ju? It just so happens that we are also going to pay him a visit." Ji Yin raised an eyebrow, glancing at Xiao Xian and Guang before looking at He Xiong. To him, the other 2 were just secondary. He Xiong was the most important one. "Since we're going the same way, why don't the 3 of you travel with us?" "There's room in the carriage," said Ji Yin. Here, apart from the nobles, no one else was allowed to ride. However, if they were invited, they were allowed to ride. Ji Yan's words were exactly what Black Bear wanted. He laughed and said, "All right, then I won't hold back." Xiao Xian saw that He Xiong did not mind at all and followed him into the car. Guang Yi followed closely behind. Ji Jing was stunned when she saw the three people get on Ji Yin and Ji Wan's carriage. When she regained her senses, she was infuriated. They were trying to use her incident to get more allies. Those two cunning people. How cunning! The road was only so wide, and the horses and oxen pulling it were huge. When a carriage passed by, it was so crowded that it almost fell into the grass ditch. The carriage was huge, about 3 meters wide and 7 to 8 meters long. There was a main seat and a guest seat. Xiao Xian and the other two sat in the guest seat. "Why are you here today, Boss He?" asked Ji Yan. "Me? No. I'm just here to accompany the guests," said Black Bear. Accompany the guests? The leader of the Black Bears was only here to accompany the guests? Who was he accompanying? Ji Yin and Ji Wan looked at Xiao Xian and Guang Yi again. However, Xiao Xian and Guang Yi were not wearing anything special. They were obviously from a barbaric tribe and did not have any symbols they were familiar with. And these two are. Ji Yin looked at Xiao Xian and Guang Yi. Xiao Xian smiled and introduced himself. "Xiao Xian from Yinjiao." "Guang Yi from Yinjiao," said Guang Yi. Xiao Xian remembered Jiju, saying that many people did not remember the Yinjiao tribe anymore. Only the older ones had some impression. Hence, when Xiao Xian introduced himself, he paid attention to Ji Yin and Ji Wan's expressions. He noticed the confusion in their eyes. It was not obvious, but Xiao Xian knew that they really did not know about the Yinjiao tribe. "I think so." Ji Yin thought hard and said, "Your tribe should be very far from the royal city, right?" Some distance," said Xiao Xian. Ji Yin asked a few more questions. When he found out that Xiao Xian came all the way here to learn from Jiju, his curiosity was gone, and he lost interest in asking more questions. Were there not many people who came here every year to learn? The queue could stretch from the royal city all the way to the village. Ji Wan looked at Xiao Xian a few times. About half an hour later, the ox cart stopped. After alighting, Xiao Xian saw a huge mansion. Looking around, it was surrounded by tall fences and fields. There were teams of guards patrolling nearby. Judging by their aura, they did not lose to the guards at the royal city's gates. Not far from the mansion was a large stone tablet with the Ji family's emblem on it. The ox car had just stopped when the carriage behind arrived. However, there was no quarrel between the two parties. Everyone was quiet. Even the ox horses pulling the carriages were unusually quiet. Ji Yin and the other two went in first. After all, they were from the Ji family, so the guards at the gate did not stop them. However, Xiao Xian and the other two were stopped. They could not even use the name Black Bear. Ji Yin wanted to curry favor with Black Bear, but he could not. In this place, they could not make the decision. There was only one owner, and that was Jiju. Ji Yin gave Black Bear an apologetic look and went in with Ji Jing and Ji Wan. The guards in front of the mansion stood there like debtors, their sharp eyes scanning Xiao Xian and the other two. Even Black Bear did not receive any special treatment. However, Black Bear did not feel embarrassed this time. Instead, he asked Xiao Xian worriedly, "How is it? Do you have any other ideas?" It was impossible to force their way in. The risk was too great. Xiao Xian gestured for Black Bear to calm down. Then, he walked towards the entrance of the mansion. Under the sharp gazes of the guards, he took out a strange-shaped copper knife from his pouch and handed it over. "Please pass a message to Jiju. Say that an old friend is here to visit." The guards who stood there like door gods sneered when they heard the first half of the sentence. Who the F***CK is this? Does he have the right to pass a message to Jiju? However, when they heard the second half of the sentence, they realized that this person really did have the right to do so. If it was anyone else who said an old friend is here to visit, the guard would have sent them out. There were too many people who used this excuse. However, it was different with the token. When they saw the knife, the guards' gazes changed. They retracted their sharp gazes and sized them up curiously. One of the guards carefully examined the copper knife in Xiao Xian's hand. He immediately put away his arrogance and coldness and respectfully extended both hands to take the knife from Xiaoxian. Please wait a moment. Then, the guard held the knife with both hands and ran through the door, disappearing in the blink of an eye. When he heard the guard say, "Please," Black Bear looked at Xiaoxian as if he had seen a two-headed beast. He opened his mouth and said, "You know Jiju? I know him. Didn't I tell you yesterday that I've seen Jiju before?" Xiaoxian said. Black Bear thought about it seriously. It seemed that he had mentioned it at dinner yesterday. However, he did not take it seriously at that time. He only thought that Jiju had seen him from afar a few times like him. "Xiaoxian, are you really here to ask Jiju about planting? There must be something else?" Black Bear asked curiously. "To have Jiju's token, it must not be an ordinary person." "Yes." Xiaoxian nodded. "What is it?" Black Bear asked. He was really curious. If he did not ask, his heart would itch. "Debt collection." "Black Bear, I won't believe it, even if you peel off my bear skin. Jiju owes a debt?" "Huh." On the other side, next to a piece of land, Jiju looked at the surrounding pieces of land with a bad expression. Around him, a dozen people bowed and listened to his orders. "I said before that there are 3 rows here. Each row is an arm's length apart." "An arm's length apart? What are you showing me? Are your arms as long as your legs?" "Reorganize." "And this piece, is the chaff husk ready?" "It will be covered in 10 days. If it's not all covered by then, everyone in the field will die. You guys can get out and die too." "And this piece of land, deep plow." "Deep plow? You've been with me for so long. Don't you know what deep plow is? If you don't, get out of the farm." Jiju scolded as he walked, his expression getting worse. The dozen people who bowed and listened to his orders did not dare to wipe their faces. They carefully answered Jiju's questions. If they made a mistake, they promised that they would fix it. They did not want to be chased out of the farm. It was so good here. There was food and rewards. People outside could not even get them if they wanted. Many people were envious. Even if they were the lowest class of slaves, many people were willing to come in. When he walked to the side of a piece of land, Jiju looked at the ground expressionlessly. "Who buried the bones here?" The dozen people around him screamed in their hearts. "It's over, it's over." This is the prelude to a rage. They had been with Jiju for a long time and understood his temperament. If Jiju scolded, it meant that there was still a chance. What they were afraid of was that Jiju did not scold. At this time, someone would be unlucky. Everyone present would be implicated. One of them was pale. This piece of land was under his jurisdiction. Although nothing had been planted, they were preparing for planting. Burying the bones was one of the procedures. Jiju had sent people to find the animal bones that were buried underground. With these bones, the plants that were planted on top of the ground would grow well. But now, looking at Jiju's expression, something had gone wrong. Jiju's eyes were sharp. With one glance, he understood the situation. If he said there was a problem with the bones, then there must be a problem. This was the authority of the entire farm. The person in charge of this piece of land trembled and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He ordered someone to bring the person who buried the bones over. Soon, 2 slaves were brought in front. They were responsible for burying the animal bones. The person in charge of this piece of land stared at the 2 slaves as if dipped in poison. After seeing Jiju, the 2 slaves knew that their matter had been discovered. They were so frightened that they did not even have the courage to explain. They lay on the ground, trembling. To be honest, although Jiju's temper was bad, compared to other slave masters who tortured and killed slaves, he was much better. As long as the land was planted well, the rewards would not be small. When Jiju was in a good mood, he was always generous to those who contributed. Even if they were slaves, he would not be stingy with his rewards. However, there were still people who were not satisfied. These 2 slaves were one of them. The animal bones that had been transported over had been replaced, and the original animal bones would definitely have been stolen by the 2 slaves to exchange for other benefits. It was impossible to say that the management of such a large farm was ironclad. Many people coveted the things here and had coveted the planting method of Jiju for a long time. It was possible that some people had taken advantage of the loopholes. For those who were good at planting, a piece of animal bone could reveal too much. Jiju's expression was frosty as he said coldly, "Drag them out." Immediately, guards came over to gag the two slaves and drag them away for interrogation. No matter the result, these two slaves would not live. Some people like to use people as fertilizer. In other slave owners' fields, they might use executed slaves as fertilizer, but not in Jiju's field. The servants all knew that in this man's field, he planted everything down to a bone, a stone, a handful of soil, and a bucket of dung. But it was also because of this that G Residence's produce had always been the best. The person in charge of this piece of land would not be able to keep his position and would definitely be removed. As for whether he would be able to recover, that would depend on his ability. Just as Jiju was in a bad mood, the steward of the farm hurried over. "Master, the young masters have arrived. I won't see them." Jiju waved his hand impatiently. "There are also a few people from the caravan. Tell them to scram." Before the steward could finish, Jiju's answer was thrown at him. The steward had expected this. He had only mentioned it as a matter of business, as long as he fulfilled his responsibilities. As for the people from the caravan, they must have wanted to see the new treasures the master had planted. Humph, they were looking for a scolding. After taking a few steps back, one of the guards came over and said a few words before handing the saber in his hand to the manager. Seeing the knife, the steward's face flashed with surprise. Then, holding the knife, he quickly chased after Jiju. "Master, is there anything else?" "Someone's coming." I told them to scram. But he handed over this knife. "Didn't you hear me tell them to scram?" "Wait, what knife?" Jiju snapped out of his rage and looked at the small copper knife in the steward's hands. His eyebrows rose as he picked it up and played with it familiarly between his fingers. "Who did you say came? Was it someone called Xiao Xian?" I don't know. The guard only said it was a young man who looked like a tribesman." "That's the kid. Bring him in." Chapter 434. Jiju's words stunned the steward, but he reacted quickly and left quickly. Knowing that Xiao Xian was here, Jiju was not in the mood to continue inspecting the fields. The more he looked, the more annoyed he got. He waved his hand and dismissed the stewards. The next time he came, if he found any mistakes, he would leave the position of steward empty. There were many people who wanted to get in anyway. Jiju did not want to say anything to those who were not capable. He waved his hand and dismissed the stewards. Jiju went to the nearest Qingmong Palace. This was one of the resting areas in the field. Sometimes, when Jiju was tired from inspecting the fields, he would go to the nearest room to rest. On the other side, Xiao Xian and the other two were waiting at the door. There were a few people who came because of the reputation, but they were all mercilessly blocked outside. Even if they presented beautiful gifts, the guards would not even look at them. The unwilling ones could only wander around. They did not have the guts to force their way in. Black Bear paced back and forth a few times outside, feeling very uneasy. He could not stay calm. In the past, he was always stopped here. It was rare to get a chance to steal from Jiju's fields in the royal city. This was a rare opportunity. Of course, he was anxious. He looked at Xiao Xian, who was standing quietly at the side, and Guang Yi, who was silent. Black Bear did not understand. How could these two be so calm? Not long after, the sound of footsteps could be heard. The people waiting outside the door, whether they were circling around or thinking of a solution, all swept their gazes over and stared at the person coming out from inside. It was the guard who had just entered. However, after the guard came out, he returned to his original position and continued to be a gatekeeper. He did not say a word. Black Bear wanted to go forward and ask, but the guard didn't look at him, as if he didn't want to talk. Black Bear looked at Xiao Xian again. The token had been sent out, but there was no response. How could this kid not be worried? Just as he was about to ask Xiao Xian, Black Bear heard footsteps coming from inside. Although the footsteps were very light and people with low abilities would not be able to detect them, Black Bear was very alert and had strong hearing. Naturally, he could hear the footsteps. Creak. The gate with the two golden bull heads was opened again. This time, it wasn't a guard. The person who walked out was dressed differently from the guards. He wore a small green cloth hat, and there were some green decorations on his clothes that looked like leaves. When they saw this person, The hearts of the people waiting outside tightened. Soon after, they became ecstatic. There were even some who recognized this person. "Chief Steward," someone exclaimed. The words "chief manager" caused the crowd outside to boil. They all swarmed forward, wanting to say a few more words to the chief manager of the golden grain fields. Even if it was just one more word, it would be good to leave an impression. Who knows? They might be able to connect with him in the future. However, just as these people rushed over, they were stopped by the guards outside the door. When the head steward came out, there were also people following behind him. These people looked even more difficult to deal with than the guards at the door. Pairs of arms firmly blocked the people outside. There were also people who were slapped down as soon as they jumped up. How could a person who could be a guard here be trash? Among them, there was no one who was lower than an intermediate totemic warrior. The chief manager stood at the door. He was familiar with this situation, so his expression did not change. He looked around and finally stopped at Xiao Xian. "Are you Xiao Xian?" the chief manager asked. Xiao Xian raised his head. "Yes, I am. The head of the house invites you in," the chief manager said with a smile. Although the senior manager's voice was not loud, everyone heard him clearly. In an instant, the noisy scene froze. It was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Everyone's eyes widened in disbelief as they looked at Xiao Xian, who did not have much of a presence. "This is my elder, Guang. He's with me." Xiao Xian introduced Guang. Black Bear was so happy his mouth almost split open. He hurried to Xiao Xian's side and introduced himself. "I'm Black Bear Bamey. I'm with Xiao Xian this time." The chief manager only smiled and did not refuse. He led Xiao Xian and the other two into the field. Creak, the door closed again, blocking the people outside who were craning their necks to look around. After entering the field from the main entrance, they saw the main hall, the Golden Grain Hall. That was where they met with guests. In reality, most of the people who met here were not important figures of Jeju. The chief manager was in charge of the reception, and Jeju did not appear. When Xiao Xian followed the chief manager into the Golden Grain Hall, he saw Ji Yin and the other two who had entered before them. Ji Yin and Ji Wan sat on one side, while Ji Jing sat on the other. They were not far from each other, but there was a clear separation between the two. Originally, they wanted to meet Jeju to ask about the 1,000 grain gold. Others did not know what Jeju had been busy with for the past year, but the Ji family knew a little. According to past practice, this should be the time for a big harvest, but the news from the field was only about other grains. There was no news of the 1,000 grain gold that they wanted to know about. Before this, many people from a Ji family had come to ask, but the reply was always no. As the days passed, the best harvest season was over, and there was still no news. The Ji family panicked. They sent people one after another, but they were all rejected. A rather powerful person in the Ji family once said that if anyone in the Ji family could get information from Jeju's field, they would be rewarded with an excellent piece of land. Hence, the Ji family went crazy. This time, Ji Yin and the other two wanted to come, but they were rejected like everyone else. They could not even enter the Golden Grain Hall. Those who knew the rules knew that the Golden Grain Hall was actually a barrier. If they could not pass through the hall, they would not have the chance to meet Jeju. Now, the three of them could only sit on the stools in the Golden Grain Hall and stare. When they heard that the chief steward was rushing to the main gate, they were curious about what happened. Now that the chief steward had brought Xiao Xian and the other two in, Ji Yin stopped drinking. Putting down the cup, Ji Yin stood up and strode over. "Black Bear, where are you going?" They did not look like they were going to stop. Were they going to pass through the Golden Grain Hall? It was Black Bear's first time in the field, and he was too excited. His mouth was still open. When he heard Ji Yin's question, he answered, "I said, I'm here with someone." "Someone?" Ji Yin finally looked at Xiao Xian and Guang seriously. When Black Bear said he was here with someone, he did not take it seriously. He thought it was just like the others. Now that he saw the chief steward leading the way for Xiao Xian, Ji Yin was filled with regret. If he had known this would happen, he would have asked more questions on the carriage. Maybe he could have used this kid to pass through the Golden Grain Hall, but it was too late for regrets. The chief steward still politely stopped the three of them and led Xiao Xian and the others through the Golden Grain Hall. There was a dirt path behind it that led into the distance. After Xiao Xian and the other two left inside the Golden Grain Hall, Ji Yin sat there sulking. Who is that kid? How did he get to meet Granduncle? Sitting on the other side, Ji Jing snorted strangely. She was happy that Ji Yin and the others did not seize the opportunity. Since they did not get to meet Granduncle, she felt better. But Ji Wan, who was sitting next to Ji Yin, tugged at Ji Yan's sleeve. What is it? Ji Yin tilted his head and asked. That Xiao Xian has something strange on him. It's in that little bag he's carrying. Granduncle might want to meet him because of what's in the bag, Ji Wan said softly. Something strange? Ji Yin was about to ask when he saw Ji Jing perking up her ears. He quickly pulled Ji Wan to the resting room beside the hall and asked her in secret. Ji Jing, who was left in the hall, smashed her cup in anger. Ignoring Ji Yin and the other two's reactions, Xiao Xian followed the chief steward and walked along the dirt path behind the Golden Grain Hall. There were many fields on both sides with all kinds of grains. Black Bear's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. These are all golden leaves, golden leaves. It was said that every blade of grass in the golden grain fields was very valuable. How many golden leaves would there be for all this grass? How many weapons could he exchange for? The chief steward was only in charge of leading the way. He did not say a word to Black Bear's questions. If you want to know the answer, he had to ask the owner of the fields. Only Jiju had the right to answer. The chief steward led them all the way to the Qingmong Hall. The Qingmong Palace was much smaller than the Golden Grain Palace, but the furnishings inside were not as extravagant and dazzling. However, there was a sense of tranquility that calmed one's irritation. If one was tired, resting in such a place was also a form of enjoyment. When Xiao Xian arrived, Jiju had just finished a cup of tea. Seeing Xiao Xian enter, Jiju pointed at the rattan mat beside him. Sit. Your place is not bad. Xiao Xian took the tea from the chief steward. The water was green and had a refreshing sweet smell. He did not know what kind of grass it was boiled with. Jiju only grunted in response to Xiao Xian's praise. Then he said, Xiao Xian, do you still have the grains in your hands? I'll exchange them with this year's harvest. How about that? I'm not exchanging, Xiao Xian said. Jiju, who was about to say his bargaining chip, choked. He had been in manor for a long time, and it had been a long time since anyone dared to reject him so directly. But thinking of how Xiao Xian had helped him before, Jiju suppressed his anger. He knew that Xiao Xian must have more grains. His eyes lit up and he continued to persuade. You see, it's useless for you to keep them. I'm not exchanging. We failed this year. We plan to continue next year. Xiao Xian said. How did you plant this year? Jiju's voice trembled. He could not bear it. We planted some on the mountain and at the foot of the mountain. I even scattered some seeds in my backyard. Xiao Xian described the situation when he first started planting the 1,000-grain gold. Not long after he started, Jiju slammed his hand on the table beside him. Nonsense. The sudden roar frightened Black Bear so much that he spat out his tea. How can you do that? What nonsense. What a waste. What a waste. Jiju's face was full of anger. He blew his beard and glared. His heart ached for the wasted grains. As expected, when he first heard that Xiao Xian was Yin Jiao, he should not have given them so many seeds. 1,000 grains. Chapter 435. No, listen to me. Xiao Xian gestured for Jiju to calm down. But Jiju couldn't calm down. The more he thought about it, the more his heart ached. Later, he brought people to the 1,000-grain gold to move the few stalks back from the mountain, but they couldn't. Their roots were too long, and no one knew where they went. They couldn't even dig them up. They took the risk to break 2 stalks, but they withered not long after. He sent people to search again, but they couldn't find the 1,000-grain gold. The few stalks there didn't produce any more stalks. Perhaps there were only a few stalks of 1,000-grain gold left, and the fruits were in his and Xiao Xian's hands. Xiao Xian, tell me, how many of this year's new grains do you want to exchange? Jiju asked, suppressing his frustration. Xiao Xian didn't reply. Black Bear guessed something from Xiao Xian and Jiju's conversation. He guessed that Xiao Xian and Jiju had found some strange grains. Xiao Xian brought some back, but failed to plant them. Jeju wanted to use this year's new grains to exchange for last year's grains. To Black Bear, this was a win-win situation. When it came to planting, especially those strange grains, the G family had always been the best. Now that the G family had a golden grain Jeju, it meant that Jeju's grains were the best in the G family. Since Xiao Xian couldn't grow them well, wouldn't it be better to trade them for something else? The golden grain field's new grains were the envy of many. If they sold them, the Yinjiao tribe would get a lot of good weapons too. Black Bear wanted to persuade Xiao Xian to agree. He looked at Guang Yi, hoping that as an elder, he could persuade him. Unfortunately, Guang Yi kept frowning as if he had heard something that upset him. It was not directed at Xiao Xian, but Jeju. Black Bear's heart jumped. How could he forget that Yinjiao people were never afraid of trouble? Even if the person in front of him was Jeju, they could do anything if they were unhappy. What to do? What to do? Black Bear's mind raced as he thought of all sorts of possible scenarios and thought of a solution to each one. Seeing Xiao Xian's silence, Jeju thought that Xiao Xian was weighing the pros and cons and was considering how much to say, so he decided to push harder. You guys aren't good at growing these. You'll just be wasting the grains in your hands. No way. As he spoke, Jeju asked the steward to bring over a large bag of grains. The bag was almost as tall as a person when placed on the ground. Opening the bag, the steward carefully scooped up a spoonful of it and placed it on the tray. He then placed the tray on the short table in front of Jeju. This is this year's new grain. Take a look, said Jeju. The unshelled grains were pushed onto the bronze tray, each grain glowing with a golden light. However, these were not the 1,000-grain gold. They were oval-shaped, not round like the 1,000-grain gold. The grains were only the size of a regular grain, not as big as the 1,000-grain gold. Black Bear rubbed his hands, wanted to grab a handful to take a look. However, he was only there to accompany the guest and could not move freely. He looked at Xiao Xian. Good grains like these, what a good deal. If Xiao Xian got more from this, he could trade with Xiao Xian again. Not only Black Bear, Jeju was also waiting for Xiao Xian to say a number and be done with it. However, after some thought, Xiao Xian did not answer. Instead, he asked, "How's the 1,000-grain gold growing on your side?" Jeju was unhappy that he did not get the answer he wanted. However, to make Xiao Xian give up, he said not bad. 60% of the grains that were planted survived. For 1,000-grain gold, this kind of survival rate was already very high. Some rare grains had less than a tenth of the survival rate when planted, but in Jeju's hands, more than 60% could survive. Black Bear had some understanding of this. He nodded to himself, praising Jeju for his golden grains. Jeju thought that if Xiao Xian asked about the method of planting, he would never tell him. However, Xiao Xian continued, "What color are the 1,000-grain gold that you planted? When the 1,000-grain gold ripens, it will naturally turn gold," said Jeju, stroking his beard. "What about after it's shelled?" "Of course it's gold." Guang Yi's expression was strange. Xiao Xian raised an eyebrow. "So you haven't planted it yet? What's the rush?" Jeju was unhappy with Xiao Xian's attitude. "Even if you're in a rush, you won't succeed. Be patient, calm down, got it?" Guang Yi looked at Jeju even more strangely. "How tall is the 1,000-grain gold in your field?" asked Xiao Xian. "It's already over the waist. Why are you asking so many questions? I only have one thing to say. Are you trading or not? If you're willing, how many grains do you want? Just say it." Jeju was impatient. He had spent too much time dealing with things here. The most important thing was the 1,000-grain gold. Seeing that Jeju did not want to say more, Xiao Xian did not stop. Instead, he continued. At that time, the seedlings were growing very well in the fields at the foot of the mountain. They looked different every day. Jeju huffed. Then they all died. At this moment, he deeply felt that bringing Xiao Xian in was not a wise decision. This kid was too good at talking nonsense. Couldn't he just name a price? No one expected that when the time came, the seedlings on the mountain and at the foot of the mountain all died. However, I realized that the seeds I had forgotten in the backyard were still alive. They just grew much slower. Hearing Xiao Xian's words, Jeju went from mockery to shock and then to understanding. They grew slowly. They didn't meet tribulation, so they were fine. I believe that when they grew, they would be killed by tribulation, just like the previous ones. This. Xiao Xian twirled the small copper cup in his hand. They actually survived. Jiju paused. Survived? Yes. Not only did they survive, but they grew taller and stronger. They were even taller than my head. However, fewer and fewer survived. Jiju lowered his eyes. Continue. Then they began to ear. The grains they produced were this big. Xiao Xian curled his thumb and index finger into a grape-sized circle. The steward standing at the side could not help but sneer. He looked at Jiju again. This family head was probably going to flip out again. As expected, after Xiao Xian gestured, Jiju looked up. His old eyes flashed fiercely as he stared straight at Xiao Xian. The invisible pressure was like a tall wall. You lied to me. You can joke with Jiju in other ways, but don't do it when you're talking about farming. He'll get angry. Such big grains? You think I believe you? Jiju was so angry his face turned green. He had wanted to have a good talk with this kid, but this kid dared to bluff him. Black Bear was terrified. It was rare for the leader of the caravan to be like this. Did offending Jiju mean that the Black Bears would never be able to get any golden grains in the future? He had wanted to bring some back for the children of the tribe. He had heard that these golden grains were very good for humans, but now it seemed that there was no hope. Xiao Xian ignored Jiju's anger and did not respond to Black Bear's glances. Instead, he took out the animal skin bag hanging from his waist and opened it. Jiju, who was about to flip out, froze as if he had been enchanted. His eyes were fixed on the bag Xiao Xian took out, his nostrils expanding and contracting rapidly. Xiao Xian took out a few grains from the bag and placed them on the tray on the table. The grape-sized golden grains rolled onto the tray and hit the golden grains with a thud. Just from the sound of it, one could tell that each grain was very heavy. The light from the window shone on the golden balls, making them shine even brighter. If it weren't for these big round balls, the golden grains on the plate would still be very conspicuous. However, when the golden round balls rolled into the plate, the original grains seemed to be reduced to the background and became much dimmer. In comparison, everything could be seen clearly. Black Bear was no longer in the mood to think of a solution. He looked at the golden balls Xiao Xian took out, and his eyes widened. These were grains. Even the steward, who had been with them for many years, was shocked to see this. With his years of experience, he could tell whether a grain was good or bad, but he never thought that the grains from his family's farm would be reduced to a background. This is... Jiju's breathing quickened as he tried to identify the smell in the air. His voice trembled and hoarse, but because he was too excited, his voice was sharp and piercing. This is the 1,000-grain gold that we grew. Our Yinjiao tribe grew it, Xiao Xian said seriously, emphasizing our Yinjiao tribe. Guang Yi was proud. So what if he was Jiju? How dare he look down on the Yinjiao people? What's wrong with our Yinjiao people? Why can't we grow anything good? I'll blind your dog eyes. Jiju didn't even notice Guang Yi's gaze. He couldn't see anything but the golden grains on the tray. He reached out and grabbed a few large round grains on the tray. He didn't even look at the small grains that were scattered outside. He picked up the large round grains and sniffed them carefully. Yes, this is the smell. It's the 1,000-grain gold. Bring me my knife. The head steward came back to his senses and left in a hurry. Soon, he came back with a plate. The plate was covered with a piece of soft leather. On the leather, there were a few strange-looking knives. The handles were very long, but the blades were very small. Jiju picked up a small knife and held a few large round pellets in his other hand. TCH, with a light sound, the shell of one of the round balls in his palm was cut open. Along with the tip of the knife, a complete husked grain was exposed. Why is it this color? Jiju was shocked. In Jiju's hand, the purplish gold grains were placed next to the golden grains. It looked even stranger. That's why I wanted to ask you. I was just asking you what color it was, Xiao Xian said. It shouldn't be. Jiju looked at the purplish gold beads in his palm. His gaze unfocused, then focused on the beads again. He closed his palm, grabbing all the beads in his palm, and ran out like the wind. Then, he ran back and dragged Xiao Xian out again. Chapter 436. Xiao Xian was dragged out of the Qingmong Palace by Jiju. After a while, he saw Jiju stop and shouted, "Yellow Earth." Xiao Xian had heard Jiju mention this name before. It was the old man's first slave, a yellow ox. Jiju called out a few times in a row. Because he was too anxious, he walked in circles. Not long after, Xiao Xian heard the rumbling sound of hooves stomping on the ground, like rolling thunder. Looking in the direction of the sound, he saw at the end of the dirt road a huge yellow ox was running towards them, leaving a trail of dust behind it. Compared to the ox that Xiao Xian had seen before, it was much bigger. This kind of beast was not to be underestimated in the forest. As the big yellow ox approached, the ground shook even more. Its huge body and the two horns on its head were full of oppressive ferocity, as if it wanted to break through all obstacles in front of it. Moo! When the big yellow ox was in front of Jiju, it slowed down and stopped beside him. However, its eyes glanced at Xiao Xian a few times, as if it was sizing up Xiao Xian, a stranger. "What are you doing? You only came after I called you a few times?" Jiju scolded. The big yellow ox lowered its head and gently nudged Jiju with its nose. It looked like it was acting coquettishly, but soon the big yellow ox seemed to have noticed something. Its nose sniffed Jiju and turned to look at Xiao Xian. Its eyes, which were bigger than a pot, scanned Xiao Xian again like a scanner. This time, it looked more carefully. Then, Xiao Xian noticed that its gaze stopped on the animal skin bag he was carrying. However, it probably sensed that Xiao Xian was not easy to deal with, and was also a stranger. Therefore, although it wanted to snatch Xiao Xian's animal skin bag, the big yellow ox did not act. However, the big yellow ox's gaze landed on Jiju again. Its nose sniffed again and then stared at Jiju's hand. "Moo, what are you moaning for? I can't let you eat this," Jiju said as he easily jumped onto the bull's back that was taller than a two-story building. "Come on up." Jiju patted the bull's back, gesturing for Xiao Xian to come up as well. The big yellow ox snorted through its huge nostrils and stomped its hooves. It was somewhat reluctant. Xiao Xian didn't hesitate and jumped up. "Let's go see the 1,000-grain gold." Jiju patted his horn. "Moo!" The big yellow ox let out a long roar. It stomped its hooves and turned around to run faster. Although it was fast, it was much steadier than when it came up. This was to take care of Jiju, who was on the back of the cow. Jiju said that Huang Tudi was another steward here. It helped to take care of several plots of land. Of course, there were also others who cooperated with it. In the golden grain fields, this big yellow ox didn't give face to anyone other than Jiju. Even the steward that Xiao Xian had met before couldn't make the ox move its hooves. The 1,000-grain gold wasn't planted in this area. On the back of the cow, Jiju said, "Every time a new strange grain is found, it will be planted in another place because there are too many variables." Jiju looked at Xiao Xian. "Take the 1,000-grain gold, for example. You've planted it before, so you should know that when you plant it, the other crops around it can't grow normally." Xiao Xian nodded in agreement. "Indeed, when it first sprouted, I found a lot of weeds in the yard. But as it grew, it disappeared." Xiao Xian didn't say anything. Once he did, Jiju's heart ached. It was such a precious 1,000-grain gold, and this kid had casually scattered it in the backyard. Fortunately, the 1,000-grain gold had strong vitality and could adapt. Otherwise, it would have been a waste. But the 1,000-grain gold that this kid scattered in the backyard and didn't care much about had survived. It had even broken through one disaster after another. Not only that, when the seedlings of this master called golden grain had only grown a little, this kid's seedlings had already matured. He couldn't stay calm. Jiju wanted to say more, but he kept it in his heart. He didn't want to speak now. Stuffy. The big yellow ox ran through the plant fields. All kinds of crops quickly passed by. Fortunately, Xiao Xian had good eyesight and could see what kinds of crops were planted. Unfortunately, he couldn't recognize most of them. The golden grain fields didn't only grow golden grains. There were also a variety of food crops and herbs. The fields were huge and included several mountains. Some crops and herbs that liked mountainous environments were planted there. When they passed by a mountain, Xiao Xian could see slaves working on the mountain. When there were no other crops in the surrounding fields, and only rows of well-equipped guards. Xiao Xian knew that they had arrived. If it were anyone else, they would have been targeted by these guards before they even got close. But when they saw the big yellow ox, the guards quickly opened a path for the ox to pass. There was no need for other tokens or passes. This big yellow ox was the best proof of identity. The big yellow ox stopped beside a wide dirt road. Jiju and Xiao Xian jumped off the ox's back. "This is where the 1,000 grain gold is planted," Jiju said, pointing to a few large fields. "Last year, there were many grains here. But when the 1,000 grain gold sprouted, all the crops in the surrounding fields died." Xiao Xian looked around. In the few fields he could see, there were only a few sparse yellow grasses growing in them. They swayed in the wind, desolate. This was indeed the result of the 1,000 grain gold. In the Yinjiao tribe, Xiao Xian only had about 20,000 grain gold in his backyard. But the plants in the surrounding areas were growing poorly. Fortunately, it was far away from the tribe and didn't affect the land much. But here, Jiju had planted a lot. The effect was obvious. There was a tall wooden fence around the area. There was a door just big enough for the big yellow ox to enter. Beside the door, there were guards inside and outside. When they saw Jiju, they bowed. "Let's go." Jiju called for Xiao Xian and walked in. Jiju had people surround the tall wooden poles after planting the 1,000 grain gold. Without Jiju's permission, no one outside could see what was going on inside. Even the stewards could not enter without Jiju's permission. Hence, the situation with the 1,000 grain gold was kept under wraps. That was why the younger generation of the Ji family was so anxious to find out what was going on. The field with the 1,000 grain gold came into view. They were all planted in the same shape as the ones in the Yinjiao tribe. Now, the height of the plants reached Xiao Xian's waist. They've already passed the first tribulation. Those that don't will become fertilizer for other plants. When the next tribulation comes, another batch will be eliminated. After the third tribulation, the ones that survive are the best, Jiju said as he looked at the green fields. Jiju's eyes were filled with pride and relief. However, when he thought about what Xiao Xian had taken out, he slapped down his pride. Taking out the few grains Xiao Xian had given him, Jiju waved at Xiao Xian. Not far away, there was a small hall called Qiju Hall. This was the highest level place in the field. When they sat down, Jiju began to ask Xiao Xian about what happened when he planted the 1,000 grain gold. As descendants of the Ji family, they had too many secret techniques that were unknown to outsiders. That was why they were able to grow better crops than others. They were able to grow rare crops that others couldn't, especially grains. Someone once said that if you found a new type of grain that was difficult to grow, you just had to find the Ji family, and they could grow it. But now, the situation was a little strange. They were seen as boorish and violent by the people, but they actually managed to grow such a rare breed, and it was even better than the Ji family's golden grain. How could these people who enjoyed the praises of the Ji family accept this? However, Jiju's main focus was on grains. Everything else was secondary. That was why he could adjust his mindset at this time. Xiao Xian did not hide anything and told Jiju what had happened. First, he wanted to understand the reason behind the change. The Ji family knew more about this than anyone else. Since Xiao Xian had told him how to grow it, Jiju would definitely help him find the reason. Second, based on Xiao Xian's understanding of Jiju, he would not go back on his word. Once he found out the reason from Xiao Xian, he would definitely reward Xiao Xian even more. "Fearsome beast meat," Jiju exclaimed. The big yellow ox, not far away, flicked its ears. "Yes, they ate it," Xiao Xian said. So, it was because they ate vicious beast meat that they passed the 3 trials and ended up like this? Jiju placed the few grains he had been holding onto the table, still unable to wrap his head around it. Although I know of some rare methods, such as bone burial, this is the first time I've heard of using fearsome beasts to feed them. Jiju stroked his beard, still in a daze. Could the secret ancestral recipe not be as good as a few pieces of fearsome beast meat? It shouldn't be. That's why I came this time to find out the reason. I also wanted to see what color the 1,000 grain gold you grew was, and if it was the same as ours, Xiao Xian said. Jiju's face reddened, but he did not say anything. Xiao Xian continued. Tell me, you're using a method passed down from your ancestors. You're using your own fertilizer. Will the result be a different color? For example, white, green, black, and so on. Different fertilizers could produce different colors, right? Jiju stopped stroking his beard as he suddenly thought of something. His whole body shook, and the few strands of beard fell to the ground. I got it. I see. Ha ha. The 5 colors of gold, so that's what it means, ha. Looking at the laughing Jiju, Xiao Xian had a toothache. This old man had gone crazy again. Who knew what he was thinking? After laughing, Jiju ignored Xiao Xian and rushed into a room, leaving Xiao Xian and the bull outside the hall staring at each other. Seeing the bull staring at the grains on the table, Xiao Xian threw one of the grains that Jiju had peeled. It was a gift to Jiju for inspection, and he would not take it back. When Jiju came out again, he saw the bull blocking the entrance with its head. It stared at Xiao Xian and mooed. Xiao Xian, who had been sitting there, was taking a nap. Chapter 437. Xiao Xian was sleeping so soundly that he was drooling. His ears had a filtering function, and he pretended not to hear anything he did not want to hear. However, as soon as Jiju came out, Xiao Xian woke up. In the past, people who came to Jiju's place were either too cautious and did not know where to put their hands, or greedy people who looked around and wanted to grab everything they saw. People like Xiao Xian who waited until they could fall asleep were too rare. After figuring out a question that had been bothering him for years, seeing Xiao Xian like this, Jiju was in a rare good mood. He smiled and asked, "What did you dream of?" "I was cooking porridge when you came." Xiao Xian wiped the drool from the corner of his mouth, not embarrassed at all. It was indeed very quiet and peaceful here. There was a faint fragrance of plants in the surroundings, and it was very relaxing. In his dream, he had cooked a pot of porridge, and the porridge was filled with white rice. That's not right. Xiao Xian paused in his stretching. White porridge, white rice. Thinking carefully in the pot of porridge in his dream, every grain of rice was round. Although they were not as big as the purple grains in the tribe, they were not much smaller. Jiju sat down and poured himself a glass of water. Seeing Xiao Xian standing there in a daze, he asked, "What did you think of?" "I was thinking carefully about the pot of porridge in my dream," Xiao Xian said. Jiju was happy and did not think much of it. He just thought that Xiao Xian was greedy. Indeed, in a place full of food like this, it was not strange to dream of such things. Without thinking much, Jiju said, "Because of what you said, I thought of a problem that has been bothering me for a long time. The 1,000-grain gold was mentioned in the records left behind by our Ji family's ancestors. I know how to plant the 1,000-grain gold from our ancestors' notes." In order to find this, he had flipped through the records left behind by the Ji family's ancestors. He had found many things. However, it wasn't called 1,000-grain gold back then. It was called Golden Valley, which had a very broad meaning. Jiju had spent a lot of effort to find out more about the planting method of 1,000-grain gold. After some modification, he had replaced some of the outdated ingredients in the recipe. Finally, he had finalized the recipe for fertilizer. However, his ancestors' notes did mention the 5 colors of gold. Unfortunately, the notes were not complete, and Jiju did not see the complete version. He did not understand the 5 colors of gold until Xiao Xian mentioned it. Only then did Jiju remember his ancestors' notes. The gold in the 1,000-grain gold does not refer to the same color. Jiju explained to Xiao Xian. The 5 colors of gold are different depending on the place and the person. Therefore, different places, different people, and different methods will produce different results. Just like how Yinjiao's gold is purple, our field's gold might not be the same color as yours. It might even be different from the original grains. Different depending on the place and the person. If that's the reason, then there should be differences between different colors, right? Xiao Xian asked. That's right. Jiju stroked his beard and suddenly felt that something was wrong with it. It felt like there was less of it. He paused, then said, "The 5 colors of the 1,000-grain gold will indeed be different. Based on my speculation, The 1,000-grain gold planted in your tribe will change greatly compared to the ones we found in the mountains. This is the trend of their change. As long as it's planted in your tribe, by your people, and by the same method, the final product will be more suitable for your tribe. However, if one day your tribe moves away and leaves the 1,000-grain gold there, a few of them will survive for hundreds or thousands of years. However, generation after generation, they will gradually decrease and change back to their original appearance until they become like this. Jeju opened his hand, holding a few bean-sized grains with a dark golden luster. These are their first harvest. Thank you for the information, Xiao Xian said solemnly. Take good care of your tribe's purple gold grains. Even if you don't know how useful it is now, one day it will prove its worth. Everything in the world complements each other. Any change has its own reason. Even though there are 5 colors, the purple one might be what your tribe needs the most. Similarly, the one in my field will be what I need the most. Jeju sighed. It was impossible to say that he was not envious of Xiao Xian, but now Jeju was much calmer. Perhaps what he needed the most was not the ones the Yin Jiao people grew, but the ones growing slowly in his field. As for Xiao Xian's Yin Jiao tribe, those who could grow the 1,000-grain gold and make a change like this were definitely not a group of rough and fierce people like the rumors said. He also had a new understanding of the Yin Jiao people. Jeju was about to talk about Xiao Xian's purple 1,000-grain gold grains when he noticed that there was only one left on the table. Jeju remembered that he had brought 3 over. One was shelled, and the other 2 were intact. Now, there was only one unshelled grain left on the table. Where were the other 2? Xiao Xian saw Jeju look over and pointed outside the door. The ox head blocking the door immediately retreated. Since he had fed the ox head, Jeju did not say much. He only huffed and thought of the 1,000-grain gold in his field. He could not help but smile. Xiao Xian, what color do you think the grains in my field will be? White, Xiao Xian blurted out. Then he realized that he had brought in the pot of porridge from his dream. Jeju was puzzled. Why are you so sure? I guessed, Xiao Xian said dryly. Jeju looked meaningfully at Xiao Xian. He did not say whether he believed him or not. His fingers tapped on the table. After a while, he said, the grains in my field are about to reach the second tribulation. How long will you stay in the royal city? Why not stay for a while and see how they go through the tribulation? Xiao Xian calculated the time and nodded. I have to discuss this with another elder. Then he smiled. You're willing to let me watch? Aren't you afraid that I'll learn all the secret techniques? Jeju waved his hand. No, the most important part of this process was the fertilizer. He had prepared the fertilizer himself before sending it out. How could he let others know? After Xiao Xian returned to the Qingmong Palace, Jeju treated them to a meal. After the meal, Xiao Xian left the field with Guang, Yi, and Black Bear. However, they left through a side door. There were too many people blocking the entrance. It would be troublesome to leave through there. They would not be able to go back. In the future, if there are too many people at the entrance, enter through this side door. This is the closest door to the strange house hall, said Jeju. The guards at the side door were also instructed to remember Xiao Xian's face. Next time, they would bring him directly to the strange house hall. Jeju also arranged for an ox cart to pull 10 big bags of grains. He brought Xiao Xian and the other 2 away. The field was too big and there were too many side doors. There was no one outside this side door, so Xiao Xian and the others could pass through easily. Black Bear was so happy he could not sit still. 10 bags of grains. Although they were all for Xiao Xian, they could at least give him 1 or 2 of them, right? The price was negotiable. On the way, Xiao Xian discussed with Guang Yi. If Guang Yi did not want to stay in the royal city for too long, he could go back in a few days. The Black Bears would send a team from the royal city to Amba City to bring back some grains. However, Guang Yi refused. He did not feel safe leaving Xiao Xian alone here. Duo Kong also said that his mission was to protect Xiao Xian. He could not let the tribe's elder be bullied in the royal city. Knowing that Xiao Xian and Guang Yi would be staying in the royal city for a while, Black Bear took the initiative to arrange for Xiao Xian and Guang Yi to stay at their station. He did not want to let go of Xiao Xian. Jeju did not say that they would not be allowed to enter the next time. When they returned to the royal city and entered the station, Black Bear had people arrange a new courtyard for Xiao Xian and Guang Yi. This would make it easier for Xiao Xian and the others to store their things. Xiao Xian, what do you plan to go to the golden grain fields again? Asked Black Bear. The day after tomorrow. I want to look around the city tomorrow. I also want to buy some things, said Xiao Xian. Black Bear had arranged a courtyard, but he did not want to use everything they gave him. He had to prepare some of his own things. That's fine too. I'll let Mao Da accompany you to buy some things tomorrow. After all, as the boss of a trading team and the leader of a tribe, Black Bear had a lot on his hands. He had been out the whole day and had left many things unsettled. There were one or two things that he did not trust others to handle. The day after tomorrow, Xiao Xian would be going to Jiju's place again. That was why he had to arrange things tomorrow and go to the golden grain fields. It's decided then. What gift should he prepare for his visit to the grange the day after tomorrow? Black Bear thought. Mao Da brought Xiao Xian and Guang Yi to the new courtyard. What do you want to buy tomorrow? I'm familiar with the royal city. I know where the best things are. He had heard about what happened today from Black Bear. He looked at Xiao Xian like he was looking at the golden leaves of the royal city. He would not give up on this opportunity to make a good impression. Who knows? He might be able to go to the golden grain fields next time. He was excited just thinking about it. We'll see. But if I have time, I want to visit a friend. I just don't know where they live, said Xiao Xian. Black Bear, who was thinking about what to give the day after tomorrow, perked up his ears. What's your friend's name? I'll ask around, said Mao Da. The Gongjia family. Do you know where they live? Yes. Tomorrow I'll... Wait. Before Mao Da could finish, Black Bear cut him off. Black Bear took 2 huge strides to Xiao Xian. He was so agitated that blood rushed to his head. His bearded, tanned face was flushed. I suddenly feel like it's better if I bring you out. I know a few Gongjia people, said Black Bear. Mao, I should be the one leading tomorrow. I'll do it. Chapter 438. With the incident with Jiju, Black Bear was especially sensitive to Xiao Xian's old friend. When he was at the entrance of golden grain fields, he did not take Xiao Xian's words seriously. When Xiao Xian said he was going to Jiju for revenge, he took it as a joke. But in the end, Xiao Xian was telling the truth. Yesterday's experience was like a dream. Hence, when Black Bear heard Xiao Xian say he was going to visit a Gongjia friend, his treasure-hunting veins throbbed violently in his head. He quickly took back his words. However, out of curiosity, Black Bear still wanted to know who Xiao Xian's Gongjia friend was. The Gongjia family is a very special existence in King City. Although the aristocrats of the 6 tribes have the most special status in King City, they're the 6 largest aristocrats while the rest are just minor aristocrats. However, the Gongjia family is different. Even the aristocrats of the 6 tribes would think twice before dealing with the Gongjia family, said Black Bear. Because of the Gongjia family's craftsmanship? Asked Xiao Xian. That's right. This was because the Gongjia family did not have much ambition. They spent most of their time on craftsmanship and did not have much time to think about other things. Although there were some who had other ideas, these people could not do much. The core members of the Gongjia family had no intention of fighting for power. Everyone trusted them, and because of the Gongjia family's talent, their attitude was naturally better. Many of our weapons came from the Gongjia family too. However, most of them came from apprentices and craftsmen. As for craftsmen, it's too difficult to hire them, said Black Bear. He then turned to Xiao Xian. What's your friend's name? Maybe I know him. He's Gongjia Hung, answered Xiao Xian. Black Bear and Mao Da. Mao Da looked at Black Bear and bent down to hug his thigh. I don't care. Boss, you said you'd let me lead the way tomorrow. Black Bear ignored Mao Da's shriek and gulped. He asked Xiao Xian again to confirm. Are you talking about the new Gongjia family member? I think so. How many Gongjia Hung are there in the royal city? Asked Xiao Xian. Just one. I heard he just came back from Gongjia Mountain. After 20 years, he became one of the most special craftsmen in the Gongjia family. Many people want him to make weapons for them, including many from the 6 major noble families. Sadly, he hasn't shown up since he came back. I heard he's making weapons. Hearing Black Bear's words, Xiao Xian nodded with certainty. Yes, that's him. Black Bear took a deep breath. Don't worry, I'll personally accompany you there tomorrow. Boss, there's still me. Mauda howled. At Mauda's request, Black Bear finally agreed to let him tag along. The next day, when Xiao Xian and Guang Yi went out, Black Bear and Mauda acted as tour guides. The Black Bear's eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets. Black Bear did not announce the golden grain fields to the public. Only a few core members of the caravan knew about it. That was why when they saw Xiao Xian and Guang Yi receiving special treatment, the others were confused. After the four of them left, they gathered to discuss it. In the end, they were all chased back to work by Mao Jin. Mao Jin felt bitter too. He knew the inside story and wanted to tag along too. Unfortunately, he was left behind to handle the internal affairs of the caravan. Xiao Xian walked on the streets of the royal city. The streets were wide enough for giant beasts to walk on. There were some strange beasts he had never seen before. However, most of these beasts had been tamed. They were huge in size and were usually very docile. They did not have violent tempers. The shops on both sides of the street were also very unique. They were all close to each other. For example, there was a street that sold food, a street that sold wine, a street that sold pottery, and a street that sold bronzes. It was rare for them to be separated. Xiao Xian and Guang Yi were interested in the bronze wares. Not only were there weapons, there were also many exquisite bronze tools and ornaments. However, Xiao Xian and Guang Yi were only going to look at them. They would not buy them. They had no use for them anyway. What did they want these ornaments for? To show off? When the shop owner saw that Xiao Xian and the rest had no intention of trading, he did not smile. Then, he looked at Xiao Xian and the rest with disdain. They were obviously tribesmen from afar. How could ordinary tribesmen buy such exquisite bronze wares? Ignoring the stares, Xiao Xian listened to the rhythmic sound of wooden blocks hitting each other. He asked, "What's that next street?" Black Bear was about to say something when Mauda cut in. It's a divination. Many of the people there are descendants of the Yi family. However, they're just unimportant people. The truly powerful Yi family rarely go there. However, sometimes a family will go there. Whenever that happens, the streets are always crowded. Divination? Xiao Xian was curious. He had heard that the divination skills of the 6 tribes of the Yi family were very powerful. Back in Gongjia Valley, he could tell from the murals left behind by the Yi family. Thinking about the not divination he had learnt, Xiao Xian decided to go take a look. Black Bear and Mauda wanted to go to the Gongjia family immediately, but since Xiao Xian wanted to go next door, they had no choice. Black Bear glared at Mauda. Who told you not to talk? If you didn't tell us, Xiao Xian wouldn't have wasted his time there. There aren't many people on the streets now. You won't be able to ask anything even if you go there. Why don't we come again when the truly powerful Yi family comes? Black Bear suggested. Xiao Xian made a sound of agreement, but he still walked over. He just wanted to ask about not divination. On this street, many tribesmen and traders from faraway places would come here for divination. Even if these people were just members of the Yi family's branch or low-skilled people, it did not dampen their enthusiasm. That was why when Xiao Xian arrived, the streets were busier than he expected. There were not many people on the streets, but there were many people in the shops on both sides. Xiao Xian listened as he walked along the road. Some people's voices were louder, so he could hear them clearly. They were asking about his luck. Others sounded like they were telling him secrets, probably asking about his privacy. Their eyes scanned their surroundings cautiously, afraid that they were being watched. After scanning his surroundings, Xiao Xian chose a shop and walked in. Sitting inside was a slightly thin old man with white hair. The old man sat cross-legged on a soft leather cushion. On a short table in front of him were some wooden blocks connected by straw ropes. There were all sorts of symbols on the wooden blocks that outsiders could not understand. When Xiao Xian arrived, the people in the shop were leaving. There was no need to queue, so Xiao Xian came to the short table. "What do you want?" The old man looked like an expert. Seeing that Xiao Xian was looking at the straw ropes and wooden signs, Mauda said, "Why don't you read our fortune today?" The old man pointed at the wooden blocks connected to the straw ropes. "Pull on the rope and move it. You know the rules, right?" I know. Although Mauda said that these people were not very capable, he was a regular here. Every time he came to the royal city, he would get someone to read his fortune. Without using any totemic power, Mauda shook the rope and the wooden blocks on the rope scattered. The old man looked at the scattered pieces of wood, then took out some smaller pieces of wood with the same shape and arranged them on the table. He moved them around and muttered something silently. After about 10 minutes, the old man stopped and wiped the sweat off his forehead. Good news. Hey, Mauda was very happy. Xiao Xian, what do you want to read? Tell me. The one just now? Is it done? Xiao Xian was confused. It's done. Mauda nodded. Xiao Xian looked at the old man sitting there. He did not say what he wanted to read. Instead, he asked, Do you know about knot divination? As soon as Xiao Xian finished, the old man snorted. You look like you don't know anything. Knot divination? It disappeared 1,000 years ago. Today's knot divination is just a trick. Young man, let me give you a piece of advice. If you see anyone doing knot divination, you have to be careful. Don't get tricked. The old man looked like he was saying, This is for your own good. So you're saying that knot divination existed 1,000 years ago? Xiao Xian asked again. Of course. Knot divination was one of the 3 most powerful divination methods in the Yi family. Unfortunately, the Yi family changed and knot divination disappeared. But it's okay. Without knot divination, the Yi family has more powerful divination methods. In the past 1,000 years, the Yi family has produced many talents and created many new divination methods. The old man lifted his head slightly, his eyes full of pride. Although he was just a peripheral member of the Yi family, the old man still talked about the Yi family. However, the old man did not say anything more about knot divination. Knot divination? You're using only one rope for divination? How do you do it? Mauda was curious. The old man looked at Mauda in disdain. The art of divination is not something you know. Don't look down on me. I'm sure you don't know either. Mauda retorted. I don't know. The old man huffed. The rope divination method I use is similar to knot divination. Plus, the rope divination method I use can be accurate. For example, I did a divination for myself. Today, there will be a crisis, and it's a matter of life and death. Why are you speaking so casually when it's a matter of life and death? Aren't you worried? Mauda did not believe him. What's there to worry about? What will come will come. The old man was still calm. If you don't believe me, you can stay here and wait. Mauda pouted. What does your crisis have to do with me? I'd rather go to the Gongjia family's entrance and watch a sword test than sit here and watch you pass the tribulation. Let's go, Xiao Xian. Let's go to the Gongjia family. I heard there's a sword test over there. Mauda was tempted. This time, Xiao Xian did not stay. However, before he left, he said to the old man, Aren't you tired of sitting here all this time? Why don't you go outside and walk towards the rising sun? There's no need to talk to the old man. The Yi family only believes in themselves, said Black Bear. From the corner of his eye, he saw Xiao Xian toss something onto the ground. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was some yellow grass. It looked like a broken rope. After Xiao Xian and the rest left, the old man in the shop kept thinking about the young man's words. Why don't we go out for a walk? This was the Yi family's place anyway. The Yi family had their own rules. There were so many pairs of eyes around, there was no need to worry about theft. After sitting here for so long, it was good to get up and walk. The old man got up and walked out of the shop. After 2 steps, he paused and looked at the sky. After thinking for a moment, he turned and walked towards the other side of the street, towards the rising sun. After about 80 steps, the old man was thinking about walking 100 steps before going back. Suddenly, there was a loud rumble behind him, followed by the loud neighing of a mammoth. The mammoth had gone crazy for some reason, charging from the next street. It knocked down a few houses, including the old man's shop. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Sharp spears glinted coldly, carrying with them a merciless, murderous aura. Like a storm, they enveloped the mammoth. Puffed, blood splattered everywhere. In the blink of an eye, the mammoth had turned into a porcupine. The murderous aura spread. Around the mammoth, there were also many spears that missed and pierced into the ground. The people on the street didn't run away screaming. Instead, many of them came closer to watch the show. This kind of thing wasn't rare, but it was inevitable that some unlucky people would suffer. For example, the families whose houses were knocked down by the mammoth wouldn't be crushed to death by the collapse of their houses, but they would be injured and trampled by the crazy mammoth. If they were even more unlucky, they might even be impaled to death by the city guard spears. The old man didn't listen to the discussions around him. He saw that his shop was in ruins. Not even a single piece of wood was left intact. It was a bloody scene. If he hadn't walked out, the old man shuddered as he thought about it. Just now, that young man, did he really just casually mention it? Chapter 439. When the incident happened on the street, Xiao Xian and the rest had not gone far. They heard the commotion. Even though they couldn't see clearly what happened, Black Bear and Mao Da could guess based on their past experience. "I think a mammoth ran past," said Mao Da. He heard the sound of elephants just now, but stopped after a while. The city guards would not let them rampage around the city and cause destruction. "Thank goodness we left quickly, or we would have been affected." Then, Black Bear remembered what Xiao Xian said before they left the shop. His eyes darted towards Xiao Xian, deep in thought. In the past, Mao Da would have gone to watch, but compared to the Gongjia family, the commotion here was not as interesting. Let's go to the Gongjia residence." "Right, where does Gongjia Hung live?" Mao Da was curious. He returned to the royal city late, so he only found out about Gongjia Hung through private conversations with the people who stayed in the royal city. "I've been there before." Black Bear pointed and walked in front to lead the way. Most of the Gongjia family members lived in one place in the royal city, surrounded by a large wall. Although there were others who lived elsewhere, there were fewer of them. However, because there were so many people, there were doors in all four directions of the Gongjia residence's wall. Actually, they did not have to worry about not finding the right door. Because of Gongjia Hung, there were many people outside. No matter how big the Gongjia residence was, they just had to ask around to find out where it was. "What? You're going to watch the sword test too?" asked a passerby who knew Black Bear. Black Bear did not say much. If he said they were going to look for Gongjia Hung, they would definitely be pestered. When they arrived, Xiao Xian saw many people before they even saw the door. Some were here to test the sword while others were here to watch. "Sai, he failed again. The sword is broken. He has no chance at all. He can't even compare to the previous one." "But how many failed today?" 21, but only one succeeded. "I didn't see him, but I heard that he was from the Phone clan of the 6th Division." The surrounding people were discussing among themselves. Someone squeezed out from the crowd, looking dejected. He was even being pointed at by the people around him. Obviously, this was the person who had failed the sword test. So many people. Xiao Xian sighed as he looked at the crowd that had filled the door. "There aren't that many now. There were more people when Gongjia Hung came back," said Black Bear. Hung, who had been away for 20 years, returned from Gongjia Mountain. The Gongjia family's jaws dropped. Back in the day, Gongjia Hung wasn't a genius. He wasn't even ranked in the Gongjia family. When Gongjia Hung left for Gongjia Mountain, many people didn't think highly of him. Every year, many people had the same idea, but after they left, they never came back. Very few succeeded, and they were all very intelligent people. Gongjia Hung was just an ordinary person. Going to Gongjia Mountain was suicide. Unfortunately, not only did Gongjia Hung come back alive, he even managed to learn the skills left behind by the best craftsmen of Gongjia Mountain. Not just the Gongjia family, even the royal city was in an uproar. Many people came to ask for weapons. The aristocrats loved swords, so many people came to ask for swords. However, Gongjia Heng's status was high enough that he dared to be rude to the aristocrats of the 6th Division. There were too many people here, and Gongjia Hung was impatient. He came up with a sword test. Only those who passed would be registered and qualified to talk to Gongjia Hung. Otherwise, they would all be blocked outside. The so-called sword test was actually a test where Gongjia Hung prepared some large rocks and placed them outside the door. Then, he placed some weapons on top of the rocks. If anyone could use these weapons to cut through the rocks without damaging the weapons, they would pass. If the weapons were chipped, they would have failed, much less broken weapons. This was actually a test of one's ability. Gong Jiahong had specially selected the quality of the weapons and rocks. If one was strong enough, they would be able to cut through the rocks without damaging the weapons. Even if the rocks were not broken, as long as they met the standards and the weapons were not damaged, they would be included in the list. To most people, these conditions were too harsh and difficult. However, they could understand. Many people even thought that this was how it should be. After all, Gong Jiahong was a master. How could he just casually make weapons for others? After the test was set up, many people came to try. However, as more and more people failed, fewer people came out to try. They were not afraid of failure. They were afraid of breaking their weapons and not being able to ask Gong Jiahong for weapons in the future. They might even be ostracized by the Gongjia family's craftsmen. Many of the Gongjia family's craftsmen and apprentices followed Gong Jiahong's footsteps closely. This was called the idol effect. When Gong Jiahong said that he would not make weapons for anyone in the future, the craftsmen and apprentices who followed him would do the same. When Xiao Xian and the other three arrived, they happened to see a swordsman who broke his copper knife while chopping a rock. He was disqualified immediately, and Gong Jiahong would not make weapons for them in the future. That was why the swordsman looked so defeated. In the future, if he wanted to ask the Gongjia family to make weapons, he would have to ask the craftsmen and apprentices who did not follow Gong Jiahong. Black Bear opened up a path in front like an armored car, forcefully pushing the crowd aside as he walked in. Xiao Xian and the other two followed behind. The people who were pushed aside by Black Bear wanted to scold him, but when they turned around and saw Black Bear, they shut their mouths. No matter what, only those with power had the right to speak. Some of the people standing on the outer layer did not dare to say Black Bear. When they saw Black Bear pass by, they wanted to take the opportunity to squeeze forward. However, they did not expect that as soon as they moved forward, they were squeezed out. One was fine, but they were squeezed out 3 times in a row. Who else wants to try? Shouted someone in the crowd. Hurry up. I still have to go home for dinner after this. I'm starving, complained someone else. It was as if they were watching a show, but the show never happened. When they saw Black Bear squeeze in, many people's eyes lit up and they perked up. Perhaps this muscular man could put on a good show? Black Bear really wanted to try. He had only been scouting and observing for the past few days. Now that he had brought Xiao Xian here, he wanted to give it a try. Even if he failed, perhaps he could use Xiao Xian's connection to change Gong Jiahong's mind? It was no wonder he was not confident. In the past, he had only chopped people and vegetables. When had he ever chopped rocks? After making up his mind, Black Bear said to Xiao Xian, "Wait here, I'm going to try." Just as Black Bear was about to go over, a man dressed in a linen gray robe squeezed in from the other side of the crowd. His hair was simply tied behind his head with a cloth strip. His face was expressionless, and he looked quiet and inconspicuous. While Black Bear was talking to Xiao Xian, the man had already squeezed through the crowd towards the rock. Since he had taken the lead, Black Bear could only wait behind. This made the leader of the trade caravan a little unhappy. The man in gray looked at the weapons on the table next to him. There were knives, swords, axes, and so on. He picked up his sword and, without much preparation, walked up to the rock and slashed at it. It was the size of a winter melon. There was no technique involved. It was a simple slash, but the moment it slashed down, it gave people a sense of sharpness. Clang! There was a deep mark on the rock, but it did not break. Looking at the man's sword, there was a shallow dent. The onlookers booed. No one knew if they were regretting or gloating. The man in front of the rock did not care about the crowd's reaction. He just held the sword horizontally and brushed his fingers across the sword. He looked at the dent on the sword with deep affection, as if he wanted to imprint it deeply into his heart. Then he looked at the deep mark on the rock. He held the sword with both hands and bowed to the door with a solemn expression. "I've learned something." After he finished speaking, the man in gray put down the sword and turned to leave without any reluctance. His lonely back was like the wandering swordsman in the old stories. The onlookers were astonished by the other party's reaction. "Wait, this warrior, what did you understand after you slashed the stone? Why did you look like you understood the true meaning of this place? Why don't we find a place to drink and talk about life?" Some onlookers followed up to ask. Unfortunately, The unknown man still did not speak. His back was straight like a sword as he walked away quickly in the autumn wind. Could he be a master? The masters in the world always had different ideas. They cannot be understood. Maybe he would become a famous swordsman in the future, some people thought. However, Black Bear did not pay attention to the person who left. Seeing that another person had failed, he was nervous. What kind of weapon do you think I should choose? Sword? I heard the Gongjia family makes more swords. Maybe that sword will be stronger than other weapons, said Mao Da. Black Bear looked at Xiao Xian. Use whatever weapon you're used to. When you slash, just treat it as if it's a ferocious beast that's about to kill you. Don't think about anything else, said Xiao Xian. Black Bear nodded. Xiao Xian's thoughts were the same. He should use whatever weapon he was used to. His favorite weapon was still the axe. On the other side, the guards outside the door had changed the rock. Every time, the rock was different, but the material was the same. Just as Black Bear was about to go over, Xiao Xian whispered something to him. Black Bear's eyes lit up, and he nodded. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the bear-like leader of the caravan picked up an axe. He weighed it in his hand and flicked the blade of the axe with his finger. He had a rough understanding of the axe. He did not know much about rocks, but he had used many weapons. He knew this much. Thinking about Xiao Xian's words, Black Bear did not face the rock directly like the others. Instead, he moved slightly to the side and looked at Xiao Xian. Seeing Xiao Xian nod, Black Bear took a deep breath and focused. He emptied his mind and imagined himself leading a group of merchants out on a journey when a ferocious beast suddenly charged at them. In this critical moment, without hesitation, he roared, raised his arm holding the axe, and swung it down heavily. As he swung the axe, Black Bear's eyes were filled with cold, murderous intent. The crowd shuddered at his murderous aura. Bam! Unlike the previous sword tests, the crisp sound this time was especially clear. The rock split in half, and the axe was deeply embedded in the wood below. The crowd was silent for a moment, then exploded. The crowd was even more anxious than Black Bear. Quick, pick it up and see. See if there's a chip on the axe. The coldness in Black Bear's eyes dissipated. He came back to his senses and was now nervous. He pulled the axe out of the wood and looked at the blade. His face lit up with excitement. No chip. There's no chip. Haha, boss. You did it. Mao Da ran over excitedly, rubbing his hands and wanting to try too. Xiao Xian also went over to congratulate him. Get lost if you're done. A cold voice rang out. It stood out among the excited crowd. Black Bear's joy was dampened by this. He stopped smiling and looked over with a straight face. Then he snorted. I was wondering who it was. So it's from the Linlu tribe. Linlu tribe? Xiao Xian knew about this tribe because the person driving the carriage to the Ji residence yesterday was from the Linlu tribe. It was said that they were riding on the Ji family's coattails and had become a new noble family in the royal city. Chapter 440. 10 people squeezed through the crowd. Judging from their attire, they seemed to be together. However, these people's attire was a little strange. They had the wildness of the tribesmen, but they also wore conspicuous silk clothes like the nobles in King City. When paired together, they wore eye-catching silk clothes with reflective patterns on the inside and a sleeveless brownish-yellow animal skin short coat on the outside. The group of 10 stood out not only because of their attire, but also because of the tall man in the middle. Xiao Xian and the rest of the Yinjiao were already tall compared to most people. Black Bear's tribe was slightly taller than most Yinjiao people. However, Black Bear's tribe was built so they looked especially intimidating. But now, in front of that person, Black Bear was obviously a lot shorter. The man's arms were as thick as stone pillars. He stood out in the crowd like a crane among chickens, half a body taller. Not only was he tall, but he was also very strong. Standing in front of such a person was like standing in front of the thick and solid city walls outside the royal city. Such a big guy. Those who were timid would be afraid just by looking at him. Who knew if he would crush or injure the people next to him if he fell? Some people wondered. Some guessed the man's identity. Those who were quick on the uptake had guessed from Black Bear's words. Linlu tribe? Lu family? That big man can't be Lubi, right? Some people speculated. Lubi? the one rumored to be able to kill a bear with one hammer? Someone exclaimed. When they heard kill a bear with one hammer, Black Bear and Mauda raised their eyebrows. Their displeasure deepened. What were they talking about? Hearing this under these circumstances, they felt like something was wrong. It sounded like a provocation. They were extremely annoyed. So that's what Libby looks like. Some people were still discussing, their voices excited and a little regretful. They were excited to finally see him in person, but regretful because he was a little disappointing. Libby was known as the most talented person in the Linlu tribe in the past few hundred years. It was said that he was tall and naturally strong. For this reason, the Linlu tribe even asked the G family to make him a big bronze hammer. Rumor had it that Libby could kill a giant bear with one strike of his hammer. Because the Linlu tribe had moved to the royal city, the royal city's citizens were all talking about it. In order to make themselves known, the Lu family naturally spread the news of all the outstanding talents in the tribe. Luby's name was naturally known by everyone. The citizens of the royal city wanted to see what Luby looked like. Was he like a demonic beast, with one arm like an elephant's leg, holding a huge hammer the size of a house, and creating a pool with each step? It was a pity that he hadn't seen Luby before. The Lu family hadn't completely moved in yet. But now, everyone knew that the main members of the Lu family had moved to the royal city. The person in front of them, who was much taller than Black Bear Bamy, was the legendary Luby. Although it was a little different from what they had imagined, there were still some similarities with the rumors. It was enough for the people of the royal city, who lacked entertainment, to talk about it for a long time. Luby's long-handled hammer had a jujube-shaped head. There were some dents of varying depths on it, signs of battle. No one knew if they were left behind by humans or beasts. No matter what, one look at the hammer, and you knew this person wasn't easy to deal with. Although Luby's hammer wasn't as big as a house, it could be used as an umbrella. Wielding such a solid hammer wasn't an easy task, much less using it as a weapon. As Luby and the rest walked over, Xiao Xian, Guang, Yi, and the rest, who were considered strong, now looked skinny and weak compared to Luby. Of course, the onlookers, including the Linlu tribesmen, were even weaker compared to Luby. They were as thin as firewood. However, the one who spoke wasn't Luby. Instead, it was a relatively gentle-looking young man who was walking at the front. The young man's gaze was always cold and mocking. Coupled with his words, he seemed a little arrogant. When Black Bear mentioned Linlu tribe, these people were unhappy. The young man walking at the front looked at Black Bear coldly. To them, the word tribe sounded too rustic. Now, everyone was imitating the aristocrats of the 6 tribes. They no longer called themselves tribesmen, but changed their surname to a family and worked hard to become aristocrats. In the royal city, when greeting or introducing themselves, most people would say X or XX. Who would say XX tribe? It wasn't easy for the Linlu tribe to change into what it was today. Now, they were being mocked. A merchant is a merchant. You have no aspirations. Vulgar. The young man's cold face was 3 parts mocking and 7 parts arrogant. Black Bear narrowed his eyes. Yes, you have aspirations. I heard the Linlu tribesmen are rushing to the royal city to be slaves. Perfect. The grains in the fields outside the royal city are all ripe. They need people to harvest them. Maybe in a few days, you'll have work to do. The pay isn't low either. It'll be enough for you to eat 1 or 2 meals. There were sparks in the air, as if they could explode with just a touch. The voices of the onlookers quieted down, but no one left. Those who left soon came back, bringing their friends and relatives to watch. One was to see Luby, and the other was to see if a fight would break out. They couldn't miss this opportunity. On one side were the Black Bears, and on the other was the Lu family of the Linlu tribe, who had just moved to the royal city. There were only 4 people on one side and 10 on the other. If they really fought, who would win? So people were already guessing and betting. The people outside even gathered to place their bets. What? Are you here to test your swords too? Do you have the guts? Do you have the ability? Black Bear asked. The young man at the front raised his chin. That's right. He took a step towards the sword-testing rock and looked at the crowd. Looming of the Lu family. I'm here to test my swords. Someone next to Looming walked out. Looping of the Lu family. I'm here to test my swords. Lubi, who was carrying a large hammer, grinned, revealing his white teeth. Lubi of the Lu family. I'm here to test my swords. 10 people announced their names in a row. It didn't seem like they were announcing their names for the sword testing, more like they were announcing their names for the people around them. They were just showing off. You black bears, if you're done, then get lost. If you're not done, then get lost. It's our turn now. Looming looked at Black Bear. Black Bear was so angry that his fur was about to explode. He hated it when people shouted at him. If it was any other place, he would have pulled out his saber and slashed at him, just like yesterday on the dirt road outside the city. However, this was the Gongjia family's doorstep. He had just tested his swords and had the right to ask Gongjia Hung to make him a weapon. What if Gongjia Hung got angry and rejected him? Was he going to waste such a great opportunity for a few henchmen? Black Bear did not want to. Besides, Black Bear had brought Xiao Xian and the rest here. He did not want to drag Xiao Xian into this. He still needed to rely on Xiao Xian to go to Jeju tomorrow. If Xiao Xian was injured, tomorrow's plan would be scrapped. Black Bear suppressed his anger. His expression darkened as he glared at the Lin Lu tribe. It was as if he had flung a knife at them. Unfortunately, the people from the Lin Lu tribe didn't care at all. Xiao Xian watched the Lin Lu tribesmen's actions from the side. He had an idea. These 10 people were not here to test their swords. Or rather, they were here to test their swords, but after seeing Black Bear, they changed their minds and targeted the 4 of them. At first, Xiao Xian thought some idiot did not recognize Black Bear after Black Bear had tested his swords. But now it seemed like these people clearly recognized Black Bear. From the looks of it, all of their actions and words were done on purpose to provoke Black Bear? No. Xiao Xian often hunted in the forest, so he was very sensitive to changes in the aura of humans and beasts. He could feel that these people did not come with good intentions. The Lin Lu tribesmen really wanted to fight. Xiao Xian was right. This was Looming's plan. Initially, he wanted to test his sword, but when he realized the Black Bears were here, he changed his mind. The Black Bears only had 4 people, and there were no other Black Bears around. The Lu family, on the other hand, had 10 people. This was a rare opportunity. In a place like Monarch City, no, not only Monarch City, it was the same everywhere. In order to gain a foothold, one had to display one's strength. And in order to display one's strength to the people around, the best way to gain a foothold in such a new place was to find a stepping stone. That was the rule. The stepping stone could not be too small, or it would be unstable. It could not be too big, or it would have the opposite effect. That was why Looming had his eyes on Black Bear, who was testing his swords. Black Bear was famous, and he was not a noble in the royal city. He was the perfect stepping stone. Looming's eyes flashed with a strange light. His earlier provocations seemed impulsive, but in fact, he had a motive. When they came over, they had already planned it out. As long as they followed the plan, Black Bear would be their stepping stone. Fixed. Fixed. Lupin and the rest were still provoking him. Mao Da was already angry. Although he knew they were provoking him, if he continued to tolerate it in front of so many people, where would the dignity of the Black Bears go? Where would the tribe's honor be? Black Bear raised his hand and gestured for Xiao Xian and the rest to stand behind him. He drew his large copper knife. Since you want to die, I'll reward you. Looming's eyes flashed. He waved his hand, and the other 9 people beside him moved. The 10 of them split into 4 groups and charged forward in a 3-3-1 formation. Everyone thought that the first to face Black Bear would be the tallest Lubi from the Lin Lu tribe. He had the highest chance of taking on Black Bear, but no one expected Lubi to charge at Xiao Xian alone with his large hammer. It was just like the strategy used by predators who lived in groups in the wild when they were hunting. They would first scatter the prey and then pick the old, weak, sick, and disabled to eat. Bullying with numbers? Despicable and shameless? No, there was no such thing here. They called it a strategic encirclement. Sometimes, even if both sides are balanced at the start, the moment the balance was broken, things would get out of hand. And from the perspective of nature strategy, the easiest way to break the balance would be to start from the weakest point. In the plan of the 10 people from the Lin Lu tribe, it was easy to pick the weakest of the 4 targets. Black Bear was out of the question. Mao Da was the second in command. He would not be weak. Eliminate again. Of the remaining two, the older one had a murderous look in his eyes. He was not to be trifled with. Eliminate again. Only one was left. This young man did not look like much. He should be the weakest of the four. Didn't you see Black Bear blocking for him? He was the one. Chapter 441. Without saying a word, Looming and the others unleashed their totemic power. Within a short period of time, they were almost at their peak. Surging power seeped out of their pores, and the air around them surged. Even people standing a little further away could feel the power radiating from them. Among the 10 of them, 7 of them were advanced totemic warriors. As for the remaining 3, although they were slightly weaker, they cooperated well and were not a burden. Instead, they were able to contribute their own strength, waiting for the right moment to deliver a fatal blow. Black Bear, Mao Da, and Guang had 2 advanced totemic warriors and 1 intermediate totemic warrior in front of them. They worked well together, too. They would not believe that their opponents were not prepared. Guang wanted a block for Xiao Xian, but he was surrounded by 3 people. He was furious. Without thinking, he drew his bronze sword and met their swords head-on. The collision of the tyrannical power and the sound of the blades colliding was like a thunderclap. Guang sensed that something was wrong. There was a chip on the edge of his sword. Back then, when Gong Jiaheng visited the Flaming Horn tribe, he had given them 10 weapons. However, Guang did not accept them because he did not like them. Plus, he wanted to leave them for the younger members of the tribe so he could use his own. When he came here with Xiao Xian, Duo Kong also wanted to give his sword to Guang, but Guang rejected him. Duo Kong still had to lead the team back, and it would be dangerous. He was with Xiao Xian and the Black Bears, so there would not be too much trouble. That was why Guang was only carrying a sword he picked up in the morning. It was a normal sword. He heard that many people in the royal city carried swords, so Guang picked a random one. He was not used to using anything anyway. His old machete had broken, and he could not make a new one. Later on, he used a sword, but he was not used to it. Xiao Xian had said that when he came to the royal city, he would see if he could get a new machete from Gong Jiaheng for Guang Yi. He did not expect this to happen before he even met Gong Jiaheng. The opponent's weapon was obviously of higher quality. Guang Yi's normal sword might not last long. Guang Yi would not be able to get rid of them. Guang Yi sensed that something was wrong, and so were his opponents. Guang Yi's opponent felt as if he had bumped into a bull. The recoil numbed his entire arm, and even his bones were trembling. Indeed, it was the right decision not to pick this person. If Lubi fought this person, he might not be able to finish him off quickly. Although he was not easy to deal with, the Linlu tribesmen were secretly pleased with their strategy. Black Bear and Mao Da would not be able to win in a short amount of time. They would not be able to take care of Xiao Xian. Looming smirked. This was all within his expectations. Black Bear's men were indeed very strong. If they had enough time or good weapons, the 10 of them might not be able to defeat them. But according to the plan, Looming believed that Lubi would be able to defeat them in one hit. With 4-1, Black Bear's side would be left with 3. As for the Lu family, it would be 10 against 3. If they couldn't defeat Black Bear, they would let Lubi do it. With their cooperation, they wouldn't lose no matter what. On the other side, Lubi's body flashed. His tall and muscular body was not as clumsy as it looked. Instead, he was unusually agile. The muscles in his legs expanded, propelling his body forward. He charged towards Xiao Xian like a cannonball. His target was clear. He did not even look at the others. In the blink of an eye, Lubi was in front of Xiao Xian. The hammer he swung seemed to have sealed off Xiao Xian's escape routes. Xiao Xian was completely enveloped in the shadow of the hammer. There was nowhere to run. Lubi was hailed as the only prodigy of the Linlu tribe in hundreds of years. He was not someone who only had strength and no skills. Clang! The sound of metal clashing reverberated in the surroundings. The power that was released permeated the air and spread out, causing the surrounding people to tremble. It was as if Lubi's heavy hammer had not hit the people standing there, but their hearts. Xiao Xian gripped the hilt of his sword with one hand and supported himself with the other. He used the blade to block the hammer. His feet stepped on the ground. The ground around him seemed to shake from the force of the impact. Spiderweb-like cracks appeared on the ground. The earth and rocks on the ground were shattered by this tremor, and like a backflow of rain, they flew up high from the ground. The web between Xiao Xian's thumb and index finger split open, blood dripping onto the ground. However, this block had stopped the hammer. He blocked it. Luby's eyes flashed with shock. He did not hesitate. He retracted his hammer and charged again, directly at Xiao Xian. Like a bolt from a crossbow, the air in front of him was shattered. Under Yang Guang's attack, the golden blade reflected a dazzling light, leaving a trail of light in the air. Clang! The sound of metal clashing was so loud it seemed like it was going to explode everyone's eardrums. The turbulence in the air was visible to the naked eye. Their vision seemed to be distorted. The sword in Xiao Xian's hand blocked the incoming hammer head-on. In order to block the hammer, Xiao Xian took a few steps back. The violent force transmitted to the ground beneath his feet. The already cracked ground could no longer withstand the force. Everywhere Xiao Xian's feet passed, there was a continuous rumble. Pieces of the ground collapsed. The depressions connected to each other, forming a long pit. The earth, rocks, and debris were sent flying high into the air, scattering in all directions. The area between the thumb and forefinger of his hands that were already injured was torn apart by this attack. The original wound widened, and new wounds appeared around it. With so many wounds extending all the way to his wrist, the bright red blood was especially conspicuous on the golden blade. Large droplets of blood dripped down to the ground. He blocked it again. The surrounding people's mouths were wide open. They looked like they were about to swallow an eagle's egg. This time, Luby was no longer shocked. He was terrified. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that the weakest of the four, who had been carefully selected, would actually be so powerful. Compared to himself, the young man looked much weaker. How could he block his attacks twice? Luby looked at the young man who was only a short distance away from him. He saw the totemic patterns on his body that looked like burning flames. He was definitely not from the Black Bears. Who was he? Luby saw the other party smiling at him. That smile seemed to contain endless murderous intent. Seeing this smile, Luby felt the hairs on his back stand up. A chill ran down his spine and rushed to his head. Before Luby could react, a strong force came from the hammer handle. He couldn't help but increase the force of his stomp on the ground. The force from the hammer handle was still increasing. He had no time to prepare. Steady. He had to steady. He couldn't stand. The rocks and soil on the ground creaked and rolled backward. He was retreating. He couldn't stand properly. He was being forced back. Luby's eyebrows twitched, his eyes filled with disbelief. His grip on the hammer handle was getting more and more sore. However, this power was still rising rapidly. Xiao Xian's totemic power was surging wildly. Ever since the trip to Gongjia Mountain, he had realized that his totemic power was surging. Increase. Power. Even more power. The power in his muscles, meridians, bones, and even flowing blood was stimulated to a greater extent in order to explode with their fiercest attacks. Xiao Xian's eyes grew brighter and brighter. Luby didn't dare look him in the eye. Luby's muscles were trembling. He wanted to block, but he couldn't. Instead, he retreated even faster. His feet, which were rooted to the ground, could only grind against the ground. The ground cracked, and the broken pieces of soil and stones were sent flying by Luby's heels. A trench was plowed into the ground, and the trench was still expanding at an accelerated rate. Luby could only feel a burning pain on his feet. It was the result of grinding on the ground. Luby had the illusion that he wasn't facing a person, but an awakening beast. This beast was roaring as if it was trying to break the seal, and he was facing the beast's roar head-on. The people around him were like statues. Other than the people who were blocking Luby's path of retreat, the rest of the spectators stood in the same position, their eyes almost popping out of their sockets. When the energy in his body reached its peak, Xiao Xian's arms shook violently. He used his sword to lift the hammer, then reached out with his free hand to grab it. Suddenly, Luby felt a burning pain in his hands that were holding the hammer. His shoulder joints made cracking sounds, and his hands were empty. He didn't even have time to react before the hammer was snatched away by the other party. Luby wanted to snatch it back, but there was a flash of golden light. It was so sharp that his neck was about to be severed. He had no choice but to retreat. Xiao Xian sheathed his sword and weighed the hammer in his hand. Since it was made for Luby, the handle was thicker so Luby could hold it. However, Xiao Xian couldn't wrap his hand around it, but he could still hold it in his hand. Xiao Xian looked at Luby, who was gasping for air, his face full of shock. Then, without hesitation, he charged forward with his hammer. The battle here also attracted quite a number of people over. How could they not be here for something so interesting? Who's fighting who? Someone who didn't know what was going on asked. One side is from the Liu family, the other side. Who's the other side? That kid's totem doesn't look like he's from the Black Bears. You mean the Liu family? The Liu family from the Lin Liu tribe that just came to the royal city? Someone who was interested in the Liu family asked. The Liu family from the Lin Liu tribe? Rumor has it that Luby wields a huge hammer. Could the one with the hammer be the legendary Luby from the Liu family? The person who explained choked. No, Luby, he's the one being chased by the hammer. Chapter 442. That's Luby? The royal city citizens who had run over to watch the show were shocked. The guards at the entrance of the Gongjia family were shocked too. The Lin Liu tribesmen who were fighting Black Bear and the rest were so shocked their legs turned to jelly. Luming had felt that something was amiss earlier. When he and the other two were blocking Black Bear, they had focused all their attention on Black Bear. They didn't dare to be careless when facing Black Bear, so he couldn't see what was happening on Luby's side. However, he believed that things would go according to his plan. However, when they first clashed, the sound was different for what he expected. Confusion flashed across his eyes, but he did not think much of it. What happened next stunned them. If it wasn't for Luby, they might not have chosen Black Bear. They had always believed that Luby would be able to stop Black Bear after taking care of the weakest one. However, who would have thought that the first target they chose for Luby would ruin all their plans? What happened to the hammer? How did this happen? If they could not even take care of the first person, who would stop Black Bear? While he was thinking, Luming was careless and was almost cut in half by Black Bear's heavy sword. He hurriedly raised his sword to block the attack. The force from the sword almost broke his arms. It was indeed a terrifying force. Black Bear was also strong. His sword slashed down, putting them under a lot of pressure. They could not stop him. Although he dodged the sword, Luming could not avoid a kick to his chest. He flew backwards, spitting out blood. When he landed, his legs were weak, and he fell to the ground. On the other side, there was another loud bang. Rocks and dirt fell to the ground like raindrops. Xiao Xian held the long bronze hammer, watching Luby roll away like a gourd. Luby, who had finally stopped, ignored the pain in his body. His eyes were still filled with shock as he stared at the young man standing there. This was the first target of the Lin Liu tribe's plan. He never thought that his hammer would be taken away by someone else. And this person seemed to be doing it more easily than him. The muscles on Luby's face were trembling. His face was cut by the flying stones. Blood and dirt flowed out of the wounds, making him look extremely miserable. The others wanted to help Luby, but they were stopped by Black Bear and the other two. Seeing that Luming was sent flying, the other Lin Liu tribesmen immediately retreated and gathered with the injured Luming and Luby. Just now, they had seen the Liu clan's people in the vicinity. They should have gone to call for reinforcements by now. This made them feel embarrassed, but at the same time, they were relieved. With reinforcements coming, Black Bear wouldn't be able to do anything to them. Guang Yi took the chip sword and stood beside Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian's performance just now made Guang Yi very happy and proud. He thought to himself, as expected of an elder, I should let these people know the consequences of offending the Yinjiao tribe. Do they think the Yinjiao people are easy to bully? Seeing that Xiao Xian was fine, Black Bear turned to look at the Lin Liu tribesmen with a strange expression and smacked his lips. Black Bear knew what the Linlu tribesmen were up to. His rugged face sneered as he looked at Luming and the others. How blind are you guys to pick on that kid? Idiots. However, Xiao Xian did help Black Bear. If it wasn't Xiao Xian, but someone else, the outcome would have been different. At the thought of the Linlu tribesmen's actions, Black Bear's anger rose again. You want to use me as a stepping stone? No matter how many people there were in the Linlu tribe, beating up the leader of the Black Bear caravan was equivalent to slapping the caravan's face. If Black Bear was beaten up in front of so many people today, the people of King City would laugh at the Black Bear caravan. Even if the caravan fought back in the future, what happened couldn't be denied. It would be a stain in the caravan's history that couldn't be erased. Plus, there was no fairness. Luckily, these people were blind to pick on Xiao Xian of all people. Thinking of the time when he saw Xiao Xian block the big bronze cauldron with one palm in Amba City, and then looking at the person standing there with a bronze hammer, Black Bear's evaluation of Xiao Xian changed again. This was indeed the style of the Yinjiao tribes. Black Bear glanced at the Linlu tribesman coldly. He took a step forward, his exposed arms and face covered in dark brown totemic tattoos. When the tattoos appeared, the thick beard that covered half of his face became as straight as copper needles. His beardless face also grew dark brown hair. His pupils dilated, flashing with a cold and violent light. His muscles swelled like they were inflated with air, making him look twice his size. Black Bear let out a long roar, like the roar of a giant bear in the forest. Many people covered their ears. The roar spread far and wide like a wave. The city guards patrolling the area heard the roar and quickly ran towards it. When they arrived, they realized that it was a gang fight. They thought that a giant beast was rebelling in the city. Usually, the city guards wouldn't care about conflicts between people or tribes as long as they didn't go overboard. What they meant by don't go overboard was that it didn't affect the interests of the 6 noble families. As for the lives of others, that was up to them. If it was some unimportant people, they wouldn't care. Once the fight was over, compensation would be paid. The damage in the royal city would also be repaired. That was why when they saw that it wasn't a giant beast causing trouble, but a fight, the city guards stopped in their tracks. Let's go. It's Black Bear and the Lu family. It's none of our business. The city guard took one look and turned to leave. Hey, don't go yet. Didn't they say Luby from the Lu family is very powerful? Look at the situation over there. It's different from what we imagined. The Lu family must be bragging. There are many powerful people in the royal city. Even if they're powerful in the Lu family, they might not be ranked in the royal city. They must have just arrived in the royal city and wanted to test their skills on Black Bear. Too bad Black Bear isn't easy to deal with. There'll be trouble later. Let's not get involved. Let them fight. An older city guard said disapprovingly. Plus, that's the Gongjia family's territory. They have their own guards, so we don't have to do anything. Let's go patrol somewhere else. The crazy mammoth we killed today tasted pretty good. I wonder what the next crazy giant beast will be. The others agreed. The people of the royal city love to watch a show, but these city guards were used to it. They weren't that curious. If they wanted to watch a show, they would have been here long ago. Then again, if they stayed here, they might get caught up in it. Why bother? Hence, the city guards hurried over and left in a hurry. When the Linlu tribesmen received the news, they gathered their men and rushed over. On the other side, the Black Bears who heard Black Bear's roar immediately ran out the door, rushing towards the source of the sound. The two parties met, their killing intent boiling. It looked like a fight was about to break out. The surrounding crowd retreated further away, but did not leave. This was a rare opportunity. They had to watch it live. Hearing it from someone else was definitely not as satisfying as seeing it with their own eyes. The Gongjia family guards looked at each other. Their orders were that as long as the people outside did not fight their way in or damage the Gongjia family's door, they could do whatever they wanted outside. If there were too many people here to test their swords, there would be fights and they would have to compensate them. But now, the situation was getting worse. Although they were still some distance away from the door, it happened here. They had to go in and report it and ask for the master's opinion. Inside the Gongjia family's courtyard, There was an open-air round table made of bronze. A well-dressed young man sat at the table. Although he did not speak, he had an aura of calmness that could not be ignored. When a guard ran over, he slowed down when he saw the young man. He bowed slightly and planned to continue walking. The young man looked up with a frown. Although there was no anger in his eyes, the guard could clearly sense that the young man was angry. His heart tightened. "What is it?" asked the young man. The guard thought for a moment. "It's something outside. The black bears who came to test their swords are fighting with the Liu family. There are more and more people here now. I'm afraid something might happen." The young man's frown deepened. He was clearly unhappy about this. He had heard the commotion outside too, but his mind was on the forging room 10 steps away. He had completely ignored the commotion outside. Where the city guards? The city guards came and left. The guard hung his head in silence. The young man was even more displeased, but this was how the city guards work these days. He said, "Let them fight outside the city. There are too many of them." The guard hung his head even lower. His first purpose here was to report what was happening outside. His second purpose was to ask for help from the other guards in the Gongjia family. Then, the young man was about to say something when he heard the commotion from the forging room. He stopped talking and hurried over. "Master Hung, how was it?" Hung walked out of the forging room, looking exhausted. He wiped the sweat off his face and shook his head helplessly. The young man's expectant gaze dimmed, returning to calmness. His gaze was determined. "If that's the case, I'll continue to search until I succeed. If I still can't find it, then I'll have to." Hung sighed. "Why do you have to do this? You're willing to sacrifice yourself for a sword?" He walked to the round table, picked up the pot of warm water, and poured it into his mouth. After drinking half the pot, he turned to the guard. "What happened now?" The guard was here because of the commotion outside. These days, Hung had received several reports of fighting outside. However, he had spent most of his time in the forging room. The isolation was too good, so he did not know what was going on outside. The guard repeated what he had just said. "Tell them to get lost," said Hung mercilessly. Chapter 443. "Yes, sir." The guard took 2 steps, then remembered something. He turned back and said to Hung, "One more thing. There's a young man outside with a sword. There are cloud patterns on the sword, that cloud pattern." The guard glanced at Hung. "It looks like you left it there." When the guard saw the young man fighting Lubi take out the golden sword, he paid extra attention to it. He had worked as a guard for the Gongjia family for a long time, so he knew more about weapons than others. He could recognize cloud patterns too. That was why when Xiao Xian took the sword out of its sheath, they had their eyes on it. Even though they were far away, they could see what the cloud pattern looked like. "Nonsense. When did I forge a sword with cloud patterns?" After returning to the royal city, other than the first few days of interaction with the Gongjia family elders, Hung spent most of his time in isolation. He was locked up in the forging room, researching. When did he forge a sword for anyone? Even if he did not give it away. He kept it in the forging room. How could it be in the hands of an outsider? It was... Wait. Hang's heart skipped a beat. He almost spat out the water in his stomach. "Wait, the kid you're talking about, what does he look like?" "What did he look like?" The guard tried to recall, but realized he did not have much of an impression. He was too focused on the sword. Under Hang's gaze, the guard braced himself and said, "That kid is pretty strong. He stole Lubi's hammer and chased after him. He looks like a tribesman, and the totemic patterns on his body look like flames." Hung said, "Ask him if he's Yin Jiao Xiaoxian. If he is, bring him in." The young man standing at the side was already shocked when he heard the guard say someone stole Lubi's hammer and chased after him. When he heard Hang's reply, he was even more shocked. "Yin Jiao Xiaoxian? I've never heard of that name. Master Hung, do you know him? Did you really forge a sword for him?" asked the young man. Hung nodded. "If it's really him, I gave him the sword." But when the sword was mentioned, he remembered the embarrassing incident when he chopped rocks to test his sword in the Yinjiao tribe. He had been inspired by that incident when he proposed to test his sword by chopping rocks to test his sword. However, there was no need to say those things out loud. "Yinjiao, that name sounds familiar," the young man said in a low voice. "That's not a person's name. It's the name of a tribe." "The Yinjiao tribe," said Hung. It's them. The young man remembered. I once heard the elders of the clan mention the Yinjiao tribe. They said that every time the Yinjiao people came to the royal city, something would always happen. However, it has been many years since the last time someone from Yinjiao came to the royal city. At that time, even you, Master Hung, weren't even born yet. I can't believe they're here again. Thinking about what the elders said about the Yinjiao people, the young man said, "That's true. They caused quite a commotion this time, too. They stole Luby's hammer in front of so many people and even chased after him. This is enough for the royal city to talk about for a long time." Hung had something he didn't say. He suspected that if he didn't let Xiao Xian in soon, would he stomp on the door? Or had he already stomped on it? Ji Fong, you've been sitting here the whole time. You heard the commotion outside, right? Was it very loud? Hung was worried. The young man, Ji Fong, thought for a moment. I think so. There was a rumbling noise. Hung was even more worried now. The guard who came to report had left, so he couldn't ask for details. But why was Xiao Xian in the royal city now? Could it be that their tribe's 1,000-grain gold was ripe? He was looking forward to that. Seeing that Hung was deep in thought, Ji Fong didn't ask further. However, he remembered the name Yinjiao Xiao Xian. He would get someone to investigate and ask about the Yinjiao tribe. How did Master Hung know this person? From his tone, they seemed to be close to. On the other side, the guard who received Hang's orders returned to the door, confused and shocked. The 300 people from the Black Bear tribe were in a standoff with a group from the Linlu tribe. The leaders of both sides were arguing, their eyes spitting fire as they drew their swords. The guard couldn't care less. After exiting the door, he jogged towards the Black Bears. Xiao Xian and Guang, you were standing there. The two sides that were about to start fighting stopped temporarily because of the guard arrival. The Black Bear and Linlu tribesmen stared at the person jogging over. Both sides' hearts were pounding. Now that they had calmed down, they regretted their actions. Was the Gongjia family angry? Did they come out to threaten them? They had miscalculated. They had been too impulsive. They shouldn't have started a fight at the Gongjia family's doorstep. The surroundings fell silent. The onlookers kept their mouths shut, quieting down so they could hear what was going on. With a few hundred pairs of eyes and 3 layers of onlookers watching, the average-sized guard ran towards the Black Bears. The people around Black Bear quickly made way for the guard to speak to their boss. However, the guard didn't look at Black Bear. Instead, he walked towards Xiao Xian. "Young man, are you Xiao Xian from Yinjiao?" asked the guard. His tone was polite, not as cold and distant as usual. "I am," said Xiao Xian. "Master Hung invites you." Swoosh. The people of the Black Bears all turned to look at Xiao Xian, their eyes glowing with envy. Black Bear whispered something into Mao Da's ear. Mao Da nodded quickly, and Black Bear sheathed his sword. He rubbed his hands and ignored the Linlu tribesmen as he followed Xiao Xian. The guard didn't say he wanted to invite him, but he didn't say he wouldn't either. They had to be thick-skinned at times like this. Once Black Bear left, Mao Da hurried his people back. His boss wanted them to prepare some gifts. After all, they had caused such a ruckus at the Gongjia family's doorstep. They had to do something to appease the master so they could ask for a sword in the future. As for the Linlu tribesmen, who cared about them at a time like this? They could go play on their own. Let's deal with Gongjia Hung first. The Black Bears ignored the Linlu tribesmen and left. Whoa! The surrounding crowd burst into an uproar. They had all heard the guard's words just now and were discussing among themselves. Xiao Xian didn't listen to their discussion. After entering the Gongjia residence, the noise outside was much quieter. As for the hammer, he gave it to the Gongjia guards. It was inconvenient to carry such a huge hammer around. After so many days, Xiao Xian realized that Gongjia Hung had changed. He now had the aura of a master. "Hey, it's you." Hung got up to greet him. "Master Hung, I'm sorry to disturb you." Xiao Xian smiled. "Haha, you're too kind." Hung was very happy to see Xiao Xian again. "I heard you beat up Luby from the Lu family. Even if they came knocking on my door, I can't let them beat me up." Xiao Xian shrugged. "Do you have a place to stay in the royal city? If you don't, you can stay at my place. I have plenty of space," said Hung. Hung was worried that Xiao Xian would cause trouble and the other powers in the royal city would seek revenge. Staying at the Gongjia residence would definitely be safer. Xiao Xian understood, but he still declined. Black Bear saw that Hung and Xiao Xian were chatting happily, so he didn't interrupt. He only spoke when Xiao Xian mentioned him. Black Bear Bamei greets Master Hung. After all, they were here with Xiao Xian, so Hung didn't show any displeasure. Plus, it wasn't their fault. Hung then introduced Ji Fong to Xiao Xian, the second son of the king, Ji Fong. To tribesmen, the king's son was the same as the chief's son next door. That was why Xiao Xian followed the other tribesmen's train of thought without any fear. Xiao Xian was here to visit Hung and give him the 1,000-grain gold. He was here to ask for a knife. Come, let's talk inside. Hung brought them to a room not far from the forging room. That was where they received guests. The forging room was a private place. No outsiders were allowed to enter. To the Gongjia family, they could live without a bedroom, but they could not live without a forging room. The forging room held too many secrets and was too important. Of course, they could not just bring anyone in. Even Wang Er's son, Ji Fong, could only wait outside when he came to ask for a sword. Xiao Xian drew a picture of Guang Yi's knife on a white cloth. Hung knew that Xiao Xian would be staying in Royal City for a while, so there was no rush. He would make the knife for Guang Yi when he had time. All right, I understand. Don't worry, you'll be satisfied with the result. If you're not satisfied, I'll make more changes. Right, how's your sword? Do you need it fixed? Asked Hung. I do. Xiao Xian took out his sword. The blade was bent at an angle after he blocked 2 of Luby's hammers. Leave it here too. I'll fix it for you. I wanted to invite Xiao Xian over for a drink tomorrow. After he became a blacksmith, he received many gifts of alcohol. I can't tomorrow. I promised someone I'll be there, said Xiao Xian. Who did you promise? Someone more important than me? Hung said jokingly. He was not serious, but there was pride in his tone. He had the right to be. I'll be visiting Jeju tomorrow. Hung said, go ahead. In terms of seniority, he could not compare to Jeju. Although the Gongjia family had always been proud, they still acknowledged Jeju's reputation. After eating golden grains for 20 years, Hung was familiar with Jeju. Even Ji Fong, who was about to leave, sat back down and continued to listen. Xiao Xian did not say much. After a brief conversation, he left a small animal skin bag for Hung and left. After Xiao Xian left, Ji Fong looked at the animal skin bag in Heng's hand and raised his hand to snatch it. He had a feeling this had something to do with what Jeju had been hiding. Unfortunately, Hung hid his hand behind his back. You want to see? No way. Xiao Xian gave him a look before he left. It was best not to tell anyone. Chapter 444. Xiao Xian and Guang Yi's swords were with Hung. Hung would fix Xiao Xian's sword. However, Hung looked at the sword with disdain. Perhaps it was due to his experience and understanding of advanced techniques that he no longer liked the original sword. He would probably make bigger changes. As for Guang Yi's sword, it was a useless sword. Hung did not even look at it. When they came out, Xiao Xian and Guang Yi had brought 2 temporary swords from Hung. They were not very good, but much better than Guang Yi's previous swords. Black Bear wanted to leave his sword there for Hung to fix, but today was not the right day. He would wait, there was no rush. Since he was able to come in and Xiao Xian had mentioned the sword test, Hung knew that the next time he came would be a good time. It would be best if he could get an axe. When they came out, the hole at the entrance was being filled up. There were Black Bears and Linlu tribesmen. They split into 2 groups to fill up the hole, not interfering with each other. As the saying goes, the first spurt of energy, the second spurt of energy, the second spurt of energy, and the third spurt of exhaustion. They didn't fight when they were most impulsive, but now that they had calmed down, they each had their own thoughts and no longer had any thoughts of standing up. Of course, that was only because they didn't fight here and now. Perhaps not long after, they would fight to the death in other places. Both sides had sent gifts to the Gongjia family. The Linlu tribe wanted to send gifts tomorrow, but when they saw Mao Da rushing back with so many gifts, they did not want to be left behind. After all, they might need the Gongjia family's help in the future in the royal city. This was especially true for Master Hung, who had just emerged this year. Even if they were not on good terms with him, they could not afford to offend him. However, Black Bear was not so worried. When he saw how familiar Hung was with Xiao Xian, he was relieved. At the same time, he was glad. They had helped the Yin Jiao people because of Amber City. They did not expect to encounter something like this in the royal city. Who would have thought that the Yin Jiao tribe, which had not set foot in the royal city for decades, would actually know Ji and Hung Da? Even if the other people in the royal city forgot about the Yin Jiao tribe, after today, there would be more people who would remember the tribe that had caused several sensations in the royal city. The ability of the people of the royal city to gossip should not be underestimated. After visiting Gongjiao Hung, Xiao Xian prepared a change of clothes. He also sold 2 bags of the grains he got from Jiju to the black bears. He still had some gold leaves with him. The next morning, Xiao Xian, Guang, Yi, and Black Bear went to golden grain fields again. Last time, it was mentioned that Xiao Xian should stay at the fields for a while so he would not attract attention if he ran around every day. This time, Xiao Xian brought his equipment and prepared to stay at the field for 3 to 5 days. He wanted to see how Jiju's fields worked, learn more about the crops and the customs here. Black Bear was here to make himself known. At the same time, he wanted to borrow Xiao Xian's reputation to get some newly harvested grains from the steward. He could not stay at the fields for too long. Jiju did not invite him, and he knew that. That was why after he followed Xiao Xian to the fields and made a deal with the steward, Black Bear left happily. Jiju did not usually manage the trade. If he had to do everything himself, why would he need so many stewards? That was why he was only in charge of the farming and left the trading to the stewards. Outsiders wanted to get their hands on golden grain? Sure, go find the steward, flatter him, and bribe him. That was why the steward of the golden grain fields had such a high status. In the field, the harvest in autumn was the most abundant. Although there were crops harvested in other seasons, they were relatively less. At this time, the field had already harvested a batch of millets. The immature ones had matured one after another. During this time, the slaves in the field were very busy. They had to harvest, plant, and prepare the crops in the field for winter. Every tribulation of the 1,000 grain gold is very important. Once it passes the first tribulation, it will reach the peak of growth. Don't look at how small they are now. After the second tribulation, they will grow faster. By the third tribulation, they will have ears. Too bad you won't be able to see it, Jiju said regretfully. He wanted to show off, but Xiao Xian and the rest had to go back before winter. That was the tribe's custom. When the 1,000 grain gold ripened, the Yin Jiao tribe would have just finished their ceremony. Xiao Xian would not be able to make it. As Jiju spoke, he stared at the slaves who were in charge of the 1,000 grain gold. The raw materials for the fertilizer were divided into several large vats. They were all prepared by Jiju before being mixed and diluted a second time. Then they were poured into the ground. Just like some medicines produced by factories, the original solution would be mixed before use, labeled as solution A, solution B, etc. When it was time to use, they would mix solution A and solution B according to the ratio in the manual. This was the same principle. Jiju would not reveal the secret to anyone. Even if the slaves and stewards in charge of the 1,000 grain gold knew the ratio and method of the second mixing, they did not know what the initial fertilizer was. How would they mix it? As for the ones in your tribe, Jiju thought for a moment, then suggested, if you plant them next year, you can try letting them meat rot. You can also add some animal bones, especially those that like to eat grass, shoots, and moss. If animal bones are not enough, you can try adding bone marrow. You can do that. Xiao Xian was shocked. Jiju mumbled, but did not explain further. Knowing that it might involve some secrets, Xiao Xian did not ask further. He noted down all of Jiju's suggestions and would try again next year. Jiju gave a few more suggestions, and Xiao Xian noted them down one by one. Jiju felt that Xiao Xian had already told him how to plant the 1,000 grain gold. It was not nice of him to hide everything from him. That was why even though Jiju did not reveal the secret of the 1,000 grain gold, other than giving some suggestions, he also told Xiao Xian many other ways to plant other grains. What kind of crops were suited to what kind of environment, what kind of crops needed to be grown, and the key points to pay attention to were all explained. The G family claimed to have 100 types of grains, but no one knew if that was true, but Xiao Xian had seen at least 20 to 30 types in the few days he had spent with Jiju. Jiju had also given some excellent seeds, according to Xiao Xian's description of the Yinjiao tribes, geographical, and weather conditions. The seeds produced by Jiju's fields were things that the tribes far away could not buy even if they had large amounts of gold leaves. Xiao Xian thanked him and put them away carefully. Even though the Yinjiao tribe mainly hunted for a living now, no one could say for sure if they would change their way of life in the future. If there was a chance to go back to the other side of the sea, he could also bring back the seeds here. Many fields had been reclaimed at the old haunt. When Jiju introduced the grains to Xiao Xian, the steward would often pick out the best of the newly harvested grains and put them in a few pots for Jiju to see. When Jiju picked one, someone would take the pot with the new grain. "What are the grains for?" Xiao Xian asked. "They will be made into grave goods," Jiju answered. "Grave goods? For whom?" "For me, of course." Jiju did not think there was anything wrong with saying this. Our G family is buried with grains. When the G family was in its most difficult times, with countless natural disasters and no harvest, we went to our ancestors' tombs to retrieve the grains that had been sealed away for emergency use. Ever since I obtained my own fief, every year when I harvest new grains, I will choose the best ones and store them away. On the day I leave, I will bring the jars with the grains sealed in them into the tomb. That way, I will be able to answer to my ancestors. In the future, if the descendants of the G family meet with any natural disasters, I would be able to help them. Xiao Xian, you're still alive and well, but you're already thinking about your death. However, what Jiju said was something that many G family members would do. The G family had stopped cremation a long time ago. Even some of the younger generation would carefully store the grains after getting them. This was a tradition passed down from generation to generation. As for why they used earthen jars instead of bronze, it was because many bronze wares would rust over time unless they were specially treated. However, not everyone had the skills and confidence to do so. Thus, the G family had a habit of using earthen jars to store grain. The bronze wares were just one of the funerary objects. Perhaps to others, the exquisite bronze wares were the most important funerary objects. However, in reality, the G family's tombs were filled with various jars and urns filled with grains. That was the most important thing. Some would be sealed with the G family's secret technique to preserve them for a long time. Some would remain intact even after thousands of years. Some would be left unsealed in alms bowls for their dead selves. The symbolism was that after death, they would still have grains to eat and would not starve. If the later generations entered the tombs of their ancestors and saw that the unsealed urns or jars were filled with decayed grain husks or even decayed grayish-white grain powder, they would put some new grains in them as a sign of respect. Some dared to think about the G family's tombs, but unfortunately, no one knew where it was. The people who went to look for him searched and searched, but they never saw him again. Jiju brought Xiao Xian to see the different types of grains in the golden grain fields. When he saw that the 1,000-grain gold had successfully passed the second calamity, he felt a huge weight lifted off his chest and was in the mood to bring Xiao Xian out for a walk. Recently, it was the peak harvest season for the slave owners' fields. To avoid trouble, they sealed off the roads, so Xiao Xian did not see anyone loitering outside the fields. Walking out of the fields, Xiao Xian saw some new crops in other fields. One of them looked like an upside-down corn cob. It was as tall as a person, and there was only one stalk. It was similar to some of the plants he had seen in the wild, but the ones in the fields were domesticated and could be eaten. "Whose land is that?" asked Xiao Xian as he walked on the dirt path, pointing at a busy farm not far away. They were on high ground, so they could see part of the fields. "That's the E family's land. I don't remember who owns it." Jiju didn't mind. It was just a small farm, and the things he grew were all very ordinary. Chapter 445. The farmstead in front was not far from Jiju's golden grain farmstead. The fences around the farmstead were not tall, only about the height of a person. It was close to the average height of a person in the royal city. If one did not want to look, they could not see it. If they wanted to, they just had to stand on their tiptoes or step on a small rock. Even if they did not stand on their tiptoes, they could still see through the gaps between the fences because the gaps between the fences were not small. All in all, the fences around the farmstead were perfunctory, but they served their purpose. Even though this farmstead was adjacent to the Golden Grain farmstead, no one usually paid attention to it. One reason was that the farmstead was too small. The people here were rich in land, and the land was vast. With such a small plot of land, it was obvious that the owner was not a big shot. People who passed by did not want to waste their energy on it. Secondly, and most importantly, the crops in this farmstead were of poor quality. Almost everyone who looked inside would shake their heads and not pay attention to it anymore. Over time, no one remembered who owned this farmstead. They would not even give it a second glance as they passed by. With such a small plot of land, one could see the end of it at a glance. The crops in the field were all stunted and could not be sold for a high price. It was fine to leave it for the owner to eat. At least he would not starve to death, but it would be difficult to sell it. Jeju also did not remember who owned this land. He only knew that it belonged to the Yi family. However, this farmstead was too small. In his memory, it seemed to have changed owners several times. He remembered that there were 2 wells in this farm. One had dried up, and the other was barely maintaining the farm. The weather in the past few years had been rather dry, and the crops in the farm had not been growing well. The frequent changes in owners were also due to the wells. He just did not know which unlucky person from the Yi family had taken over. The Yi family. TSK. Jeju shook his head. Xiao Xian could feel the unspoken words from what Jeju had said in the past. In Jeju's opinion, the Yi family was not suited for this. They could do divination on the street, but not in the fields. They did not have the talent. Moreover, the Yi family was full of lunatics. Some of them were not strong. On cold days, they could stare at the dark sky for an entire night. Then, they would be half dead and bedridden for a few days. How could their bodies withstand the cold wind? He was courting death. The Yi family was the most suicidal of the 6 aristocrats. There were also some who sat with blank eyes. Then, as if they had thought of something, they would suddenly laugh out loud or suddenly grieve. It was frightening. Jeju recalled the usual behavior of the Yi family members he knew and could only shake his head helplessly. He could not understand. However, the fact that the Yi family was able to become one of the aristocrats of the 6 tribes meant that they had their own capabilities. The Yi family didn't develop their muscles or bones, but their brains. Some people could observe the heavens and earth. Some could predict good or bad luck, and some had other talents. If the Yi family really wanted to scheme, they could dig a hole without a shovel and kill without a knife. This was also why many people were in awe of the Yi family. However, Jeju was not afraid of the Yi family. Other than the few people in the Yi family who were truly capable, the rest of them could scare off those who did not know the truth. But if they were to put on airs in front of him, he directly ordered people to take care of him with sticks. Why? Are you curious about the Yi family? Asked Jeju. Many remote tribes came to the royal city and were always curious about the Yi family. A little. I think they're quite mysterious, said Xiao Xian. What's there to be mysterious about? They're just putting on an act. Jeju did not think much of it. However, Xiao Xian was not curious because he heard that the field belonged to the Yi family. He was just curious because he saw the scene in the field. It was the peak harvest season for most of the fields. The field not far away was the same. Although it was pathetically small compared to the surrounding fields, the overall harvest was still okay. The slaves in the field carried their bags to an open space in the field. There was a short wooden table there, and a man in dark clothes was sitting in front of the table. Although he was not dressed conspicuously, there was a sense of elegance about him. He was different from the busy slaves. The other party was young and did not look like a steward. At this time, he was sitting at the table, holding a pen and writing something on a cloth. The slaves carried their bags and reported to him, then left for the warehouse. He was probably counting. This was nothing. Xiao Xian was curious about the movements of his other hand. He saw that on his other hand, her fingers were slightly bent and the tip of his thumb was moving back and forth between the knuckles of the other four fingers. Come, let's go take a look. You can't even farm like this. Jeju walked over. He had also seen the crops planted in the field. By his standards, it was simply too horrible to look at. He had only gone over to say a few words, but he felt uneasy. The person sitting in his field was counting the harvest and sighing. When he heard the report, he quickly put down his pen and walked over to greet him. I am from E family, EC. Why are you here? EC bowed respectfully and looked at Jeju in surprise. Why can't I come? No, you're welcome. EC asked someone to bring a chair over for Jeju. No need. I'll leave after a while. Jeju waved his hand. When he saw the crops in the field, his anger flared again. What kind of land is this? I can't stand it. EC thought, what kind of land is this if you can stand it? But he still listened humbly. The moment Jeju opened his mouth, he went on and on about which plots of land were too densely planted, which plots of land were too sparsely planted, which plots of land were severely lacking in water. And that soil, was that even soil? It was as hard as a rock. EC listened silently with his head lowered. When Jeju finished, EC smiled helplessly. There are indeed many shortcomings. But he didn't plant this land. His father was the one looking after it. He was only here to help count. This piece of land was not good, not only because of the well, but also because of the soil quality. They didn't know what had been planted in the past, but it had changed the soil quality. They couldn't restore it, and the crops they planted were poor for 2 years. Even with the G family's guidance, they were not cut out for this. The harvest could barely sustain them. Poor. Jeju was angry at this person's lack of improvement. But since he wasn't from the G family, he didn't want to say more. Fortunately, he wasn't from the G family. If he was, he would probably die from anger. Jeju snorted and stopped talking. He motioned for EC to continue with his work while he walked towards the well nearby to check on the situation. Xiaoxian followed him to take a look. The situation was not good. The water level has dropped again. Jeju was troubled. From the looks of it, it would get drier year after year. Even drought-resistant crops needed water. It'll get better, Xiaoxian comforted. No, you don't understand. Jeju looked worried. I have a feeling that something big is going to happen. There are always signs of changes in the world. Also, Jeju didn't finish his sentence. He knew someone from the E family. That person was also the crazy person who stayed outside in the cold to stare at the night sky. He remembered that old friend once said in his sickbed, the world that is united for a long time must be divided, and divided for a long time must be united. Unfortunately, when he asked that person after the incident, that person didn't say anything. He only smiled meaningfully. His smile was very annoying. Because of this, the G family was on high alert. If there were any signs of rebellion, they would forcefully suppress it. They had worked so hard to build up the current situation. How could they allow others to destroy it? They were especially wary of the other 5 aristocratic families and the newly rising tribes. They were also the main targets of observation. At this moment, a flirtatious voice came from the entrance of the field. Little C. Xiaoxian looked over to see a young woman in a delicately sewn silk gown. Her body was voluptuous but not bloated. She twisted her waist and combed her hair into a casual but flirtatious bun. She looked up with a smile and walked in quickly. Her steps were not big, but her steps were quick. Her skirt fluttered like a blooming flower. She raised a delicate hand to cover her mouth and walked towards EC. Her eyes were like water, and she smiled. She was about to say something when she saw Jeju not far away. Her expression froze. She didn't expect to see Jeju here. She quickly stopped smiling and stood up straight. She bowed slightly to Jeju and threw a roll of cloth to EC. Then she asked the slave to bring a chair with a back. The slaves in the field were no strangers to this person, so they weren't surprised by her words and actions. Xiaoxian saw the patterns on her clothes and remembered what Black Bear told him about the aristocratic families of the 6 tribes. He guessed that this woman was from the Mu family of the 6 tribes. Jeju was unhappy with the Mu family woman's actions, but didn't say anything. To him, as long as it wasn't someone from the G family, he didn't care. If he had the time, he might as well look at the 1,000 grain gold. The roll of cloth the Mu family woman threw to EC was actually a record of her harvest from the field this time. She had come to ask EC to help her verify it again. She didn't have the patience to verify it herself. If she really wanted to verify it, she might not be able to do it in a day or two. She didn't even know if her calculations were correct, so she came to find EC. EC didn't say much. He put down his work and opened the roll of cloth the woman threw to him. There were more than 20 pieces of cloth, each about half a meter long and 2 palms wide. They were all filled with small, densely packed words. EC flipped the cloth with one hand while 4 fingers on his other hand moved quickly. His thumb was like a shadow as it moved between the other 4 fingers. Xiaoxian noticed that when EC looked at the roll of cloth, he only glanced at the words on each piece before moving on. It took him less than half a minute to finish one piece of cloth. After looking through all 20 pieces of cloth filled with words, he wrote down the final result on an unwritten piece of cloth. In total, it took him only 15 minutes. When he was done, EC's eyes were filled with envy. He handed the results and the roll of cloth to the woman. "Congratulations, it's another big harvest." The woman giggled until fine lines appeared at the corners of her eyes. She was in a good mood because of this harvest. However, when she saw the final result, her expression changed instantly. Like a ribbon suddenly turning into a steel knife, her eyes were filled with a cold, murderous intent. Those lowly slaves, they actually underreported by so much. Each page didn't underreport by much. If one's arithmetic wasn't good enough, they might have made a mistake. However, when the pages were combined and the final result looked at, there was a lot more. The woman didn't tell EC the results reported by the servants. However, since EC calculated the results, it must be true. That was why the woman was angry. In the past, she couldn't be bothered to make a fuss about it and turn a blind eye to it. But now, the servants were simply too greedy. If she didn't give them a beating, they would be even bolder next time. "I'll send someone to deliver the reward tomorrow." After saying that, the woman took EC's results and left quickly. She was filled with a murderous aura. She reckoned that blood would be spilled at the farmstead later. Xiaoxian finally realized that this woman from the E family was helping others calculate the accounts. However, how did this person's brain work? It was like a humanoid computer. Chapter 446. EC was usually not at the farm, but he would definitely come here at this time every year. One reason was to check on the farm's harvest. The harvest was not good to begin with, and if the people below were to slack off, the days would be even more miserable. However, EC's main purpose for coming to the farm at this time was not his own farm, but to catch up with the harvest and earn some extra money. He calculated quickly. Not everyone had this kind of talent. Therefore, after accidentally helping the neighboring farm, EC's reputation spread among the farm masters. At this time, the farm masters who were impatient with their own farm inspection would come to EC for help. In any case, EC used a short amount of time and was highly efficient. His accuracy was almost 100%, and he only needed to pay some remuneration. It saved a lot of time and allowed the farm masters to catch evidence of their subordinates lying in the shortest time possible. Why not? To be honest, EC's extra income at this time of year was not much less than his own farm's. The woman from a Mu family was the owner of a nearby farm and was one of EC's sources of income. Not long after she left, someone came to look for EC. No wonder he had set the table here and looked like he was going to do something big. This way, people who entered the farm could easily find him, and it would be convenient for them to accept work. Jiju did not stay at EC's farm for long. After seeing the situation with the well water, he went to the other farms to ask. Sure enough, every farm was in the same situation. The water in the well was decreasing every year. If the weather remained the same, it would be difficult to continue. Now, only EC's small farm with few wells was a little more difficult, but in a year or two, there would be more people in trouble. He had thought that finding some drought-resistant crops would be able to ease the situation, but now it seemed that there was still no solution. When Jiju returned, he was very quiet and was not in a good mood. The chief steward did not understand why and only found out when Xiao Xian whispered to him. The chief steward thanked Xiao Xian gratefully and then hurried to get some medicinal tea for Jiju. At the same time, he was thinking about how to persuade the farm master. Jiju was their golden thigh. If Jiju fell ill from thinking too much and something happened to him, how would the stewards live in the future? According to Xiao Xian's knowledge, there was a river not far from the royal city. The royal city had dug a canal to bring the river in years ago, but the canal might not be able to solve everything. After all, the farms outside the city were too spread out, and if there was a drought, the canal would dry up. Also, Xiao Xian felt that this was not the only thing Jiju was worried about. There were other things that Jiju just did not want to tell him. Seeing that Jiju was not willing to talk, Xiao Xian did not continue asking. He and Guang, he had already stayed here for many days. They had seen the 1,000-grain gold grow again after passing the second tribulation. They had also identified many useful crops and obtained precious seeds. Xiao Xian planned to leave. There was nothing to do even if he continued to disturb them. However, before he left, there was something he needed to settle. The next day, Jiju locked himself in his room in Qingmong Palace and did not come out. Xiao Xian went out on his own. The guard at the gates already knew Xiao Xian and did not stop him when Xiao Xian said he was just going out for a walk. Xiao Xian went straight to EC's farm. EC had just finished checking a thick roll of cloth for someone. Beside it were 5 burlap bags filled with grains. This was his reward. A large man with an oily face took the roll of cloth and left with a dark expression. He must have found out that his subordinates were greedy. His footsteps were filled with the smell of blood. When he saw Xiao Xian enter, EC only glanced up without much enthusiasm. "What's wrong? Is the owner of the Golden Grain Farm not here today?" "No, I have something to ask you," said Xiao Xian. "Oh, I don't do things without a reward." EC raised an eyebrow. "If you can solve it, of course there will be a reward." Hearing that, EC finally looked at Xiao Xian. "Tell me, what is it? How much do you need me to calculate? Or do you want to change the accounts?" "None of those." As he spoke, Xiao Xian took out a small piece of light-colored linen cloth. There were 2 concentric circles drawn with paint on the cloth. There were also some symbols and lines on the drawing. This was the diagram of the circles left behind by the Yi family that Xiao Xian had copied from the walls of Gongjia Valley. However, he had broken down the complicated diagram and simplified it before drawing it on the cloth. Now, he was showing it to EC. He could not understand these diagrams left behind by the Yi family, so he could not deduce what he wanted from the diagram. However, he saw that EC was very talented in calculations yesterday. He also did not seem to have much ambition. According to what he heard from the steward of the Golden Grain Fields yesterday, EC's family was only a marginal part of the Yi family. Otherwise, they would not have been able to survive in such a small field with poor soil quality and only one working well. Also, EC could not perform divination, so he could not survive in the royal city's divination street. He could only use his talent to earn money. EC saw that Xiao Xian had only taken out 1 piece of cloth. He was surprised. Just 1 piece. That was easy. However, when EC unfolded the cloth and saw the diagram on it, his pupils constricted. He shot up and stared at Xiao Xian. "How did you get the diagram of the Yi family?" "Diagram of the ring." So the circular diagrams were called diagrams. "You don't need to know how I got it. You just need to tell me how to solve this diagram," said Xiao Xian. EC stared at Xiao Xian for a few seconds, then sat down again. He tapped his fingers on the table. "What do you want to know? Solution? You can't possibly know." Xiao Xian did not refute. He pointed at the lines and symbols on the diagram and asked EC to explain. EC did not refuse. He briefly explained the meaning of those symbols and the broken line. He did not mention the core secrets, nor did he mention the key to how they used the ring analysis diagram to calculate quickly. To them, it did not matter if outsiders knew about this. The Yi family had many secrets, but very few people could understand them. The Yi family and the Gongjia family were just as confident and arrogant. However, Xiao Xian only needed to know what the lines and lines represented and how large the numbers were. That was enough. To verify, He added some numbers into the diagram and asked EC to tell him the final result. Then he took out a thin charcoal stick and a piece of cloth. Since there was no place to put them, he placed the cloth on the other side of EC's table. EC stared at the diagram as he calculated. Xiao Xian did the same. He did not have a crazy brain like EC, so he could only do rough calculations. When Xiao Xian was done, EC was already waiting. When Xiao Xian stopped writing, EC looked away from the piece of cloth Xiao Xian was writing on. He looked at Xiao Xian in surprise. "You're done too?" Usually, if it was someone else, it would take at least half a day. How could he be so fast? Xiao Xian could not help but admire EC's calculation speed. He could not even do it with his fingers. "What's the result?" Xiao Xian asked. EC was still doubtful as he handed the cloth over. Xiao Xian looked at EC's result. It was the same as his own. He was satisfied. Although he was slower than EC, he just needed to understand how the ring analysis worked. He could also copy the complicated diagram from the mountain wall. "You really calculated it?" EC was shocked. Why was there someone like this around? Was he trying to steal his business? How much will I be paid?" Xiao Xian asked. EC thought for a moment, then extended 5 fingers. 50 golden leaves. 50 golden leaves were equivalent to 5 bags of grains on the ground. However, if you can tell me how you calculated it, I won't take the reward. EC said, "You just need to tell me the rough method you used. You don't need to tell me the details." Xiao Xian counted 50 golden leaves and put them on the table. He then collected several pieces of cloth and turned to leave. "Wait," EC called out. Xiao Xian thought EC was going to ask about the calculation. Unexpectedly, EC said, "Recently, there have been fewer birds in the sky." Xiao Xian looked at him in confusion. "What do you mean? Are you going to leave the field soon? If so, be careful." EC did not overdo it. He could not do divination, but he could come to such a conclusion based on the changes in the birds in the sky. "Thank you." Xiao Xian thanked him and left EC's field. After Xiao Xian left, EC took out a piece of cloth and used a brush dipped in sticky paint to write on it. If Xiao Xian was here, he would definitely find that what EC wrote were several vertical multiplication and division formulas that he had listed out during his calculations. Although what Xiao Xian wrote at that time seemed to be written upside down in EC's opinion, the numbers and the vertical lines were all unfamiliar to him. What EC wrote at this moment was exactly the same as the vertical formulas, numbers, and lines listed on the cloth that Xiao Xian had drafted. After he finished writing, EC looked at the unfamiliar symbols and lines on the cloth and thought. From time to time, he would use the brush to draw on a number and mark it with a symbol that he was used to. "Young master, someone from the family fields is here to ask for your help." A field steward came over and told EC. EC kept the cloth and signaled for the steward to bring the person in. After this, closed the gates. "That's all for today." The steward was still calculating the profits from the past few days. How much profit could he get? Why was the young master not taking any more jobs? Then, "What about tomorrow?" asked the steward. "We'll talk about it tomorrow." Yes. Although it was a pity, the steward still followed EC's instructions. He hung a sign at the entrance of the field, indicating that the people who came later could go back. The young master was resting today and did not say when he would start taking jobs again. Regardless of what happened at the field, Xiao Xian went back and called Guang Yi, who was looking after the stewards, over to discuss and leave. Chapter 447. After packing up, Xiao Xian bid farewell to Jiju and left with Guang Yi with the seeds Jiju gave them. Jiju was busy with something in the house. He only showed his face for a short while before going into seclusion again. The butler prepared a bullock cart for Xiao Xian. There were few horses in the fields, but some cows. They were the ones who transported the grains to the royal city. The cow the butler brought out was the one used to transport the grains. "There's no driver?" Xiao Xian was surprised. The butler only brought a wooden cart with a yellow cow pulling it. There were 4 carriages with tents at the back. There was no driver on the cart. "There's no need for a driver." The butler smiled. "After sending you here, it will come back. Aren't you afraid someone will take it away?" Xiao Xian asked. "Who would dare?" The butler was confident. It has the mark of the golden grain fields on it. Even if it gets lost, there will be many people fighting to send it back. No one will dare to touch this cart, let alone take it away. As if it was responding to the chief steward's words, the yellow cow even mooed. All right, thank you, chief steward. After saying goodbye, Xiao Xian and Guang Yi got on the cart. After settling down, the yellow cow drove off on its own. On the dirt road, there was no one in front, so it sped up. Even if there were people, they would move aside when they saw the obvious mark on the cow. Guang Yi looked enviously at the cow pulling the cart. If only our tribe had something like that. There will be. Xiao Xian remembered the cows used to pull carts in the tribe on the other side of the sea. However, this was not the time to reminisce. Xiao Xian said to Guang Yi, be careful, it might not go smoothly. Guang Yi's heart tightened. Didn't you say no one would dare to touch the cart? That's under normal circumstances. You can't say for sure. There are always special circumstances. Since Xiao Xian said so, Guang Yi unsheathed his sword and peeked through the gaps in the curtains. Yellow Ox was running happily. Suddenly, it slowed down and lost the rhythm of its hooves. It seemed to be a little anxious. After hunting in the forest and experiencing countless life and death situations, Guang Yi's instincts were very sharp. The moment he sensed any movement outside, he adjusted his body to the best combat state and observed his surroundings cautiously. There was an ox cart in front of them. The oxen were the ones commonly used in the surrounding farmsteads. There was nothing special about it. Most farmsteads would leave marks on the oxen, but this one did not. Moreover, it didn't avoid the ox cart like the other carts. Not only did it not avoid it, it even sped up and rushed over. Was that bull crazy? Seeing that the ox cart was about to crash into them, the ox cart on Xiao Xian's side let out an angry cry. It lowered its head, pointed its two sharp horns forward, and stomped its hooves on the ground as it charged forward. Bang! Perhaps it was because the cattle in the golden grain fields were fed with high-quality feed, but this one was much bigger and stronger than the others. Its horns collided with the other's horns, and both the cattle and the cart were knocked out of the dirt road. However, this wasn't the end. Before the ox cart was knocked over, the driver cracked his whip. Go! The sacks of grain on the cart were ripped open. The people wrapped so tightly that only their eyes could be seen. Their eyes were like tigers and wolves, and they held unmarked knives and swords in their hands as they charged toward Xiao Xian. Seeing this, Xiao Xian and Guang Yi understood that the other party was coming aggressively. They wanted to rob and kill. Sharp weapons with a cold glint cut through the air, mercilessly slashing at the carriage. The sound of the cloth on the carriage being ripped apart, the sound of the carriage being split open, and a series of different sounds combined into one. It was like a sudden storm, fierce and violent, not giving them any time to breathe. Clang! Crack! The carriage couldn't withstand the sudden attack of so many people. It exploded into pieces and fell to the ground. Only the metal wheels of the carriage rolled on the dirt road until they reached the ditch on the side. Yellow Ox was startled by the sudden turn of events. It let out another long cry after knocking away the other party's cart. Moo! If this was any other place, the ox would have been killed long ago. However, here, none of the robbers touched the ox. Their goal was clear. They were going for the people on the carriage. When Xiao Xian and Guang Yi were ambushed, they rushed out from two different directions. The wooden planks of the carriage under their feet were smashed into pieces. The sword drew a bright light in the air, screaming like a wild beast as it collided with one of the robber's knives. Clang! The knife in the robber's hand broke, the broken half flying into the air. Although Xiao Xian's sword was not as good as the previous one, it was still a gift from Hung. Even if it was not made by Hung himself, but by other Gongjiao family craftsmen, the quality was still better than a normal sword. Xiao Xian's sword was fast and powerful. It broke the robber's knife in half. However, Xiao Xian's sword was chipped. He didn't look, didn't stop, and sliced the neck of the robber who was about to ambush them. Scarlet blood sprayed out, splashing onto the bodies of the other assassins. However, they didn't feel any fear just because one person died, nor did they feel any regret or sorrow. They were like heartless killers. Guang Yi's face was dark. He didn't hold back at all. He didn't care who sent them or which faction they belonged to. Since they wanted to steal their goods, they couldn't blame him for being ruthless. This was what he used to deal with when he led a team on a trade trip. Not to mention, the enemy was coming at them aggressively, each strike deadly. Guang Yi's first strike sent the person flying. Before the opponent could attack again, Guang Yi's second strike came, cutting off the opponent's arm. He wanted to cut the person in half, but there were too many people around. Guang Yi's strike did not achieve the desired effect. He flipped over and kicked the person behind him. He was anxious too. One was Xiao Xian's safety. Another was the seeds Xiao Xian had with him. They were all good seeds from Jiju. They were very rare. Could it be that the robber's target was the seeds? Or maybe the 1,000 grain gold? Of the 11 robbers, 2 were crippled and 1 was dead. The remaining 8 continued to surround Xiao Xian and Guang Yi. Of the 4 robbers surrounding Guang Yi, one of them charged toward Xiao Xian. A cold light pierced through his waist. If not for Xiao Xian's quick reaction, he would have been impaled. However, even if Xiao Xian dodged, the rope of the pouch hanging from his waist was cut. Before Xiao Xian could snatch the animal skin bag that flew out, a few more silhouettes appeared and blocked Xiao Xian's path. The bag that flew out was knocked away by one of the silhouettes with a sword and landed in another person's hand. Not far away, a cart carrying crops passed by. It was a cart carrying crops from the fields to the royal city. There were even guards beside the cart. There were a lot of caravans like this recently. No matter who they were, if they saw the golden grain fields cart in trouble, they would definitely help. Go! Seeing that there were people coming, the robbers stopped fighting. They abandoned the wooden cart and the half-dead cart and quickly retreated. Their movements were as fast as lightning. In the blink of an eye, they were quite a distance away. When the caravan on the dirt road arrived, the robbers were already gone. Guang Yi wanted to chase after Xiao Xian's pouch, but was stopped by Xiao Xian. Let them take if they want. Don't chase. But inside the pouch, there are no seeds or 1,000 grain gold inside, said Xiao Xian. Isn't that the pouch you always carry? Guang Yi was confused. Yes, but it's just a pouch. I've already changed the things inside. Guang Yi calmed down. If it's not seeds or 1,000 grain gold, then what's in the pouch? Something good from the manager before we left, said Xiao Xian. At the golden grain fields, Jiju's yellow earth wanted to run out when it heard the bulls cry. As the boss, it had to protect its underling when it was being bullied. If it wasn't for Jiju who came out to eat, the gates of the fields would have been smashed open by the giant bull. He didn't let yellow earth out, but Jiju asked the manager to send people over to check on the situation. How dare they rob the golden grain farm's carriage? The manager was furious. He had just promised Xiao Xian not long ago, and now something had happened. It was like a slap to his face. However, by the time the head manager sent people over, the other party had already seen that the situation was not good and had fled. If it wasn't for the mess on the ground and the bull's cries, he would have thought nothing had happened. They didn't find any clues on the dead culprit. In an inconspicuous courtyard in the royal city, 2 guards rushed into a house. Young Lord Yin, and the others. Before the guard could finish speaking, the sound of hurried footsteps could be heard. With a bang, the door was kicked open. Ji Yin, what do you want? Ji Jing shouted angrily when she saw the intruder. The people beside her also stepped forward to protect Ji Jing. Ji Yin looked at the people beside Ji Jing and stared straight at her. You sent people to steal Xiao Xian's pouch during the road closure? Panic flashed across Ji Jing's eyes, but she quickly calmed down. What nonsense are you talking about? I didn't send anyone. You didn't touch your own people. You borrowed someone else's hand. Don't talk about me. Aren't you eyeing that pouch too? How else would you know the situation over there? While the 2 of them were arguing, another person rushed in from outside, still gasping for breath. Ji Jing's eyes lit up when she saw the person. However, before she could say anything, Ji Yin reached out and snatched the pouch hidden in the person's robe. Ji Yin, how dare you steal my stuff? Ji Jing brought the people beside her over to fight for it. While the 2 sides were fighting over the pouch, someone grabbed the rope tied to the mouth of the pouch and pulled. Bang! The contents of the pouch spilled out like a cannon. The small room was instantly filled with the pungent smell of organic fertilizer, and the powder was sprinkled on everyone's body. There was a strong smell of nature in the air. Jian, who was holding the pouch, Ji Jing, who was sprayed with the stench. Everyone in the house turned green. Where was the promised treasure? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.